Chapter 1066. Yang Yi originally thought that he would have to spend more time to persuade Shi, but he did not expect the little girl to think it through so quickly. She even pouted her little mouth and spoke in a muffled voice, which made Yang Yi feel pleasantly surprised. It's very good that you can think this way. Yang Yi gave Cici a thumbs up and praised her from the bottom of his heart. Dad is very happy to see that you've made progress in your thinking. You're starting to be able to discover the shining points of others. However, the little girl did not become happy because of her father's praise. She grabbed her clothes with her two little hands, lowered her little head, and sadly muttered, "Papa, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said bad things about the class monitor. Come here, let Dad hug you." Seeing this, Yang Yi changed his preaching tone and gently opened his arms. Children who realized their mistakes were actually unwilling in their hearts. Moreover, not to mention children, even if it was an adult, who would be willing to honestly admit their mistakes. Therefore, even if she did not do well, she still felt a little wronged and sad. Hearing her father's words, the little girl ran over with grievance, threw herself into her father's arms, and buried her little head in. Yang Yi gently pulled Shishi's little hand, and carefully combed her fingers one by one as if they were treasures. Then with a soft voice he whispered in the little girl's ear, "Every time you grow up, it's inevitable that there will be some difficult experiences, but it doesn't matter. Dad will always be by your side and support you. I will be your strongest backing, and I will also applaud your success. Just like tonight, your thinking has improved a lot, and Dad is very happy." Yang Yi smiled and said, "Then if you encounter setbacks on the road of growth, just like what Dad said, we pursue perfection, but we may not do it perfectly. For example, at the end of last semester, you didn't do very well." She unwillingly twisted in her father's arms. How could he touch the pot that did not boil? Haha, okay, let's not talk about this. Anyway, if you encounter setbacks or problems, don't be afraid, you have Dad. Your dad is the most powerful person in the world. Yang Yi boasted shamelessly. But unexpectedly, this sentence still made Shishi unable to help but twist in her father's arms and giggle. "What's wrong? Isn't it?" Yang Yi raised his eyebrows and reached out to tickle the little girl. Shishi was ticklish, like a snake to hide, and her laughter became much louder. After a while, when her laughter subsided, Yang Yi was ready to continue. But he didn't expect that at this time. The little girl in his arms raised her little head, blinked her big bright eyes and said, Papa is actually super powerful, although not the most powerful." Yang Yi smiled. "Anyway, no matter what, Dad and Mom will be your strongest support." Yang Yi rubbed Shishi's little head and gently said, "Okay, it's time to read." After completing the small goal of reading before going to bed, Shishi, who was already very sleepy, yawned, climbed into her big bed, and prepared to sleep. Yang Yi turned off the room's main light, leaving only a small night light, and then walked to the bed and tucked her in. "Dad." The little girl's voice was like a whisper. "Yes. I will go back to school next Monday and praise the class leader." The little girl turned over in the dark, somewhat sleepily tried to open her big black eyes, looked at her father, and whispered, "Yes, Dad also believes in you. You will definitely do better." Yang Yi's heart was moved, lowered his head, gently kissed the little girl's hair, and softly said, "Go to sleep, good night." "Good night, Dad." The little girl's voice was slightly raised. Obviously, even though she was very sleepy now, her mood was as cheerful as a spring breeze. After the premiere of I Am a Singer, the response was very enthusiastic. In the next few days, the entertainment news gave a lot of attention to the show and the singers who appeared on it. Especially Qin Yu and Su Linglong, who had been out of the music industry for a long time. The media praised them for being as elegant as before. Although they had not been in the top ranks for a long time, their singing was still intoxicating, full of nostalgia. As for the other singers who were not well known and could be said to have been buried, they also received a lot of attention. In the first episode of the competition, they showed amazing singing skills and made a lot of the media exclaim, "I Am a Singer has hit the jackpot." However, it was not that there were no voices of dissent. In fact, in the entertainment industry, it was difficult for news that followed the trend to stand out. On the contrary, news that liked to stir up trouble, nitpick, and easily cause controversy could get more traffic and attention. As a matter of fact, some media wanted to see the world in chaos and began to criticize the show. I Am a Singer is full of dirty tricks. Qin Yu and Su Linglong are just Murphy's stepping stones to fame? The media's argument was the same as the doubts that Qianli Chuanshu received when he participated in China's Voice. They felt that the show I Am a Singer was designed by Yang Yi, and it was only to support Murphy alone. Obviously, this report deliberately distorted the facts, and some of the content it described was biased. For example, it saw that throughout the entire show, Murphy's performance was very exciting and received the approval of many audience members, but it completely ignored the other contestants' performances. Of course, among all the contestants, Murphy's singing skills were definitely at the top, but this report also ignored Murphy's efforts. Not to mention the other contestants, Murphy's singing skills were outstanding even in the entire Chinese music industry. There were many such reports, and even when Murphy only got third place in the first week, they all thought that it was a deliberate act. They proudly said that Murphy's performance would improve in the future, and as long as the production team was willing, Murphy could be ranked first at any time. China Star Productions reacted very quickly, and they quickly responded to these reports that the show was full of dirty tricks. I Am a Singer's official microbroadcasting showed a notarial certificate issued by Jiangqing's notary office and a third-party notary organization, respectively, to prove that their entire process was fair and just, and that the voting results of the live judges were fair and just. In addition to criticizing the show's dirty tricks, some media also criticized I Am a Singer for being pretentious. It was not just the media. Perhaps some of their rivals, such as Xiangnan TV Station and Glorious Star Productions, who could not stand the fact that China Star Productions was doing well, had bought fake reviewers. Many people were spamming the exaggerated expressions of the audience members of I Am a Singer. Is it really that exaggerated? They actually cried when they looked at the stage? Or they stood up in unison when they were listening to the show, looking like they were intoxicated? We're so embarrassed. The audience members were hired by the production team, right? Even China's Voice isn't as weird as this. Zhongxing Production didn't respond to the Water Army's defamation. It was good to have some controversy. Yin Yangfeng told the people from the operations department in the company, "It's a good thing that people are arguing about your show. There won't be any controversy. The more they argue, the more people will watch our show. As long as we guarantee the show's quality, we don't have to worry about the show not being popular." In fact, I Am a Singer was already very popular. Although it was only the first episode, its ratings had already broken many of Jiangnan TV station's ratings records. Perhaps it was because of Yang Yi and so many other celebrity singers that the viewership ratings for the first episode of I Am a Singer had already surpassed the viewership ratings for the first episode of China's Voice. In fact, it still had a lot of room for improvement. According to the statistics on the internet, the netizens' expectations for the second episode of I Am a Singer were off the charts. Many people were looking forward to the second episode, to see the most brutal elimination segment. Chapter 1067. Xiaoya's popularity was slowly dwindling. On Wednesday of the new week, the number of curious children from other classes who came to visit had decreased. She also didn't mention Xiaoya's name like she did in the first week. Yesterday, she took her own team members to take care of Xiaoya, and today she entrusted it to the new team. During the break after the second class, Cici took the shuttlecock and called a few of her friends to go downstairs to play together. This small shuttlecock kicking team couldn't be organized last week because of Xiaoya, and these days, they had been on and off. They hadn't played together for a long time. This time, Xixi call attracted a lot of people. Even Nan Zhaoyu, who usually didn't like to exercise, came to play shuttlecock. The friends laughed and kicked the shuttlecock. Suddenly, Lan Xian thought of something and said in her loud voice, "Sister Xiaowei, can I ask you a question?" Yu Xiaowei looked over and said with a positive expression, "Sure." She still hoped to be able to help her good friend. "That's right. Did your teacher ask you to write a diary?" Lan Xian was slightly out of breath. Kicking the shuttlecock was a little tiring for her, but fortunately, she could persevere. She complained while panting, Our teacher is so mean. After the spring outing, she asked us to start writing a diary. Now there's one more homework. Before Yu Xiaowei could answer, Chen Shiyun's eyes lit up. As if she had found a soulmate, she nodded vigorously and complained. Yes, yes, yes. Our class also has to write a diary. My teacher also asked my mother to supervise me. Chen Shiyun showed a look of deep hatred. However, at this moment, Chen Shiyun and Lan Xian reached a rare consensus. Yu Xiaowei waited for the two of them to finish speaking before whispering. Xaner Shiyun, I also have to write a diary. But writing a diary is quite interesting. Compared to doing homework, I like writing a diary more. For Yu Xiaowei, the diary was her little world. Here, she could let go of all restraints, like a small fish returning to the ocean. And she could release her thoughts to her heart's content. Does she look like Xixi? But in fact, she was still very different from Xixi. Xixi liked to record her colorful life, while Yu Xiaowei liked to write some short stories in her diary that popped up in her mind. She rarely touched on her real life. At most, in the past 6 months, her handwriting had some interesting stories about her good friends like Xixi, or some figures of her family's puppy Noodles. Perhaps it had something to do with her introverted past. As a girl who liked to read and read all kinds of storybooks, her heart was filled with many strange and colorful stories. Xixi blinked as she listened to her friend's discussion. She couldn't help but join in. I like to write diaries too, because it's very interesting. I can write a lot of stories so that I won't forget. As Xixi spoke, Nan Zhaoyu, who was next to her, hurriedly caught the shuttlecock that Chen Shiyun had kicked at him. Then, as if it was a hot potato, he hurriedly kicked it out. It happened to fly in the direction of Xixi. Xixi was so engrossed in talking that she forgot to catch it. The shuttlecock hit her skirt and fell to the ground. Hey, I didn't catch it. Xixi reacted and called out regretfully. There was no PE class today, so Xixi wore a more comfortable and good-looking crimson grid-type school uniform with suspenders. In fact, for the safety of the girls in the school, Huijia Primary School's uniform was designed with a longer hemline. Girls with shorter legs might have to wear it as a long skirt. However, Xixi's legs were longer than other girls of the same height. Therefore, the hemline of Xixi's skirt only reached her knees. Fortunately, at home, Murphy had been very attentive to Xixi's behavior education, especially when it came to wearing skirts. She had warned Xixi repeatedly about many taboos and requirements. Therefore, when the little girl saw the shuttlecock fall, she bent down and squatted down. Her left hand pressed down on the hemline of her skirt, her legs together, one leg flat, the other facing down. Only then did she get close to the shuttlecock and pick it up with her right hand. It was a very standard movement. Xixi certainly didn't consider that she would be exposed so quickly. However, these were all good habits that she had cultivated in daily life. Xixi didn't even think about it before squatting down with her skirt down. It was a long story, but in reality, Xixi picked up the shuttlecock very quickly and continued to play with her friends as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, the discussion about the diary was still in full swing. Nan Zhaoyu scratched his head and said to Lan Xian, who looked embarrassed, Xian, I started writing a diary a long time ago, because my dad taught me how to write, and then made me write a diary. Lan Xian pouted and said unhappily, You're different. Your dad is a very good calligrapher, so you're not afraid of writing. I get a headache when I see those words. I don't know what to write. Yu Xiaowei silently caught the shuttlecock that was flying over. She first steadied it, and then kicked it to Xixi. Then she said softly, Xian, we all have to write diaries. Because we don't know how to write, we have to write a lot. Only then can we understand. After all, Yu Xiaowei was a big sister who was 2 grades higher than the first graders. Yu Xiaowei's understanding of thinking was much higher than that of the first graders. Xixi actually wanted to say something, but because she was more popular among her friends, there was a high probability that the shuttlecock would be kicked to her when everyone kicked it. After all, people subconsciously wanted to be close to the person closest to them. So just as she was about to say something, Yu Xiaowei kicked the shuttlecock and interrupted her. Xixi could only shut her mouth and try to catch the shuttlecock first. This little girl was going to be suffocated. I also want to write a diary. Then my dad said that if I don't know what to write, I can write about what I read today. Young Luoqi also said softly like Yu Xiaowei. Hee Chi, let me tell you I have a way too. I will write about what I watched today. Lu Xiaoyu got inspiration from Yang Luoqi, and said excitedly. Finally, Shishi kicked the shuttlecock out and found a chance to speak. Moreover, this conversation with her friends also gave her a lot of inspiration. I know. Shishi was overjoyed and pulled Lan Xian and said, Xian, you can write, what delicious food did you eat today? This way, you will have a lot of things to write about. The content looked very thin, but not every child's diary was as jumbled as Shishi's. The requirement for a first grader's diary was actually very low. A few sentences could be used as a diary for a day. Lan Xian was stunned for a moment, and a look of surprise appeared on her face. She shouted, Yes. I can write about delicious food. I have a lot of delicious food. Today I can write about this. My dad brought back pork jerky from Guangdong province, and then tomorrow I can write about delicious food. She even started to count. Then what should I write? I don't read books. I also have to write about watching TV, right? Chen Shuryan saw that Lan Xian's problem was solved and asked anxiously. No, I already wrote about watching TV. Lu Xiaoyu shouted. You can't write the same thing as me. Shishi listened and felt that something was wrong. After thinking carefully, she understood. She said happily, Hee little fishy, it's okay. You and Chen Shuryan watch different TV. That's right. Lu Xiaoyu understood now. She scratched her head and smiled embarrassedly. Shuryan, you can write about watching TV. Chapter 1068. Lan Haokai had indeed returned from Guangdong province. He had only returned yesterday. On Tuesday, he attended a joint press conference organized by the Sahara Online Mall and the Guangdong Provincial Department of Commerce. Of course, this was only a more ceremonial public release event after the signing ceremony held within the government. However, it was worth mentioning that this joint press conference was organized by the Sahara Online Mall. The experienced Sahara turned this seemingly more politically significant press conference into a scientific and technological event. The Sahara Online Mall not only invited a large number of traditional media reporters, but also many new internet media, freelance writers, tech micro-broadcasting celebrities, and so on. The level of grandeur and attention was comparable to that of Apple's new product launch in Yang Yi's previous life. The Sahara Online Mall had done this many times, and every time there was a major announcement that could attract the attention of peers in the industry. For example, the earliest Sahara Express news conference in most cities to implement the new model of next-day delivery. Another example was the Double 11 Shopping Festival conference the year before last. The press conference of the new Sahara Taobao Mall had indeed attracted a lot of attention. Not only did the media scramble to report on it, but many technology micro-broadcasting VIPs even played with Tech's live broadcasts on micro-broadcasting, because the live broadcast industry had not yet risen. However, compared to the previous conferences, the new brand established by Sahara after acquiring eBay did not receive much recognition this time. Even if the leaders of the Guangdong Provincial Department of Commerce read out some policies and tax preferences for the Sahara Taobao Mall at the conference, the scientific and technological community basically held a wait-and-see attitude toward Sahara's move this time. After all, in the future, Sahara would implement a dual-direction and dual-mode development form. No one could predict the future, and no example could prove that the Taobao model would succeed. Moreover, some media outlets that sang a different tune expressed their worries to the public. The Taobao model might shake the foundation of the Sahara Online Mall. If they wanted to please both sides, they might not be able to do both sides. Of course, the media that were not optimistic were still in the minority. Most of the technology media could still vaguely feel the magic of the Taobao model. Especially at the conference, Sahara's president, Fu Jun, proposed the concept of the Sahara Online Mall's main B2C and the Sahara Taobao Mall's main C2C concept. The person in charge of the Taobao Mall also shouted the slogan, "There is no treasure that cannot be found, no treasure that cannot be sold," when introducing the Taobao Mall. These were a little new concepts that were still worth carefully tasting. In order not to overshadow the main event, Alipay, a third-party payment tool that was still under development, was not mentioned at this conference. Otherwise, there were many new things that were worth these technology broadcasters to study. From the information that had been released, the far-sighted media and technology broadcasters could feel the confidence of the Sahara Desert. They could also vaguely feel that this model seemed to have some impact on real business. Therefore, they did not dare to make rash judgments and could only wait and see. Sahara Online Mall's Taba Mall was Taba Mall's conference of course of the Sahara Online Mall Malls. Sahara Online of the mall. This could be considered Lan Zhaokai's first public appearance in the Sahara Online Mall. Although Boss Lan was self-aware and did not rashly snatch the microphone to talk about some topics that he did not specialize in, he sat in his seat and laughed like an invisible person. However, the broad and fat Boss Lan still managed to get quite a bit of the limelight. When the technology broadcasters at the scene were reading the text and photos, they guessed, judging from his position, this person's position in Sahara is not lower than Sahara Express's Li Long. He even shook hands with the leader of the business department just now. Could he be the mysterious investor who provided financing to Sahara a few years ago, and then made a big profit? These people's minds were indeed sharp. They guessed the main point immediately. After that, the nameplate on Lan Zhaokai's seat provided these technology broadcasters and media reporters with a name that could be searched. Naturally, Lan Zhaokai's identity as a real estate tycoon in Jiangnan also surfaced. After that, during the interview segment after the conference, a reporter obtained confirmation from Fu Jun that Lan Zhaokai was indeed a shareholder of Sahara Online Mall. However, when the reporter asked whether Lan Zhaokai was the second largest shareholder, Fu Jun smiled mysteriously and evaded the question by saying, "This is a company secret, it's not convenient to disclose." Lan Zhaokai returned after making a name for himself in Guangdong province. However, in terms of life, there were not many changes to Lan Zhaokai. No one knew whether it was because Boss Lan had been in business for many years and had experienced too many storms, so he had long become indifferent to these things, or whether he had been subtly influenced by Yang Yi and did not take these small matters to heart. On Friday morning, Lan Zhaokai came over to Yang Yi's house as a guest. He even treated this matter as a joke and complained to Yang Yi. "Those administrative staff in my company even turned the media reports into clippings for me to see. I flipped through them and found that out of 10 reports, 3 of them were scolding real estate in a roundabout way. They said that in these past few years, real estate bosses like me have made huge profits in real estate, so I came to the technology world to disrupt order, squandering the housing funds that other people had worked so hard to earn for their entire lives." Yang Yi smiled and said, "Then those administrative staff girls in your company flattered the wrong horse." "Not really. These reports were only scolding real estate, but they still praised me. They said that I had good foresight, that I was one of the few real estate bosses who had chosen the right target to invest in the technology world." Lan Zhaokai said with a chuckle, "But I still know my own worth. At the end of the day, it was because of you that I was able to buy shares in Sahara Online Mall. Moreover, if it weren't for you telling me that the current internet and mobile internet had great prospects for development, I wouldn't have considered getting involved." Chatting with people with high EQ was a very comfortable thing. Although Yang Yi didn't take the credit for himself, Lan Zhaokai still used a very clever and relaxed way to chat with Yang Yi. This made Yang Yi feel that although he was in the limelight, he wasn't arrogant. He was still the old brother Lan. Then again, did Lan Zhaokai have any meaning in doing this? Of course there was. Moreover, Lan Zhaokai didn't put himself in a lower position by doing this. He was still faintly stabilizing his relationship with Yang Yi. One had to know that Yang Yi was a very cold guy. Although he was usually chatting and laughing, and was also very gentle, unlike his burly physique, that was just a kind of sincerity that Yang Yi showed to his family and good friends. Towards outsiders, he wasn't casual at all. It wasn't easy to become a friend that he approved of. Lan Zhaokai relied on his high EQ to successfully develop a relationship with Yang Yi, from an ordinary child's classmate's parent to a neighbor's relationship. Step by step, they became close friends. Didn't you see that Yang Yi rarely interacted with Lu Kong, Nanny Yun and other parents? Was Lan Zhaokai the only parent that he considered as a friend? Lan Kai even shamelessly asked Yang Yi to be his daughter's godfather. This could be considered as another way to strengthen the relationship. His usual behavior was the key to allowing him and Yang Yi to have a beneficial relationship and get along like brothers. Lan Kai actually came back and he even volunteered. Yang Yi let him take his place to fetch Xi and Lan Xian home. A new weekend was coming, and Xiaoya, who Xi couldn't forget, finally got permission from the teacher to come to their house as a guest. Chapter 1069. Xi, wait a minute. Let Daddy take a look at Xiaoya. Yang Yi's words stopped the two girls who were clamoring as they carried the birdcage upstairs. Xi had just gotten out of the car. After greeting her parents, she couldn't wait to introduce her home to Xiaoya. However, Steamed Bun wagged his tail and came over to welcome his little master. At this moment, Lan Xian got out of the car from another door. She had just walked over with her school bag and saw this scene. She became nervous. There are Steamed Bun. Xi, run quickly. Let's quickly send Xiaoya to a safe place. Lan Xian shouted. Lan Xian's loud voice was unintentionally a catalyst that intensified Xi's worry. Thus, the two girls cried and ran upstairs with the birdcage in their arms. Their original safe place was actually Xi's bedroom. When Yang Yi saw this scene, he found it very funny. He even simulated the thoughts of Steamed Bun and Xiaoya at this moment in his mind. Steamed Bun, aggrieved, what's wrong with Steamed Bun? Did Steamed Bun eat your Lan family's meat? Steamed Bun, I'm very obedient. I only eat the food given by Master. Besides, the food given by Master is so delicious. Who would want this little bird that doesn't have much meat? Xiaoya, frightened, help. Your Xiaoya is going to be jolted to death by you before she is scared to death by dogs. Leaving this small drama aside, Yang Yi stood by the side happily to watch the show. He inadvertently discovered a problem. The Xiaoya in the cage seemed to look different from last Thursday when he took her to the vet. Thus, out of curiosity, Yang Yi stopped Xi and Lan Xian. Xi was still very obedient. She and Lan Xian carried the big birdcage and returned to Daddy's side. Daddy, you have to hurry up. Otherwise Xiao Guai, Xiao Gray, and Dodo will also come over. Xi said worriedly as she looked up at him. Yeah. We can't let them see. If they see, they will eat Xiaoya. Lan Xian anxiously stomped her feet. Yang Yi saw it clearly this time. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Don't worry about Xiao Guai and the others. Let me see this little girl. Do you feed her bugs every day? Xi blinked her big innocent eyes. Although she didn't understand what her father meant, she still replied in her clear voice, that's right. Xiaoya likes to eat bugs. She doesn't like to eat bread or anything else. She only eats this kind of high-protein mealworm and rarely exercises in the cage. Yang Yi shook his head and smiled. No wonder she has put on so much weight in just a week. Did the little girl gain weight? Xi was a little surprised by her father's judgment. She had just passed the cage to her father, and now she and Lan Xian were standing in front of the cage, looking at Xiaoya carefully. However, they took care of Xiaoya every day. How could they see the change? Yes, she has gained weight. Think about it. Why did Daddy ask Xian Air to come to our house for dinner only after she exercises seriously and consumes a certain amount of calories? Yang Yi said with a smile. Isn't it because he is worried that Xian Air will get fat like Xiaoya if she eats too much and doesn't exercise? Lan Xian saw that she was being used as an example. She pouted a little unhappily and grabbed Yang Yi's clothes and shook it. Haha, Xian, don't be afraid. Your daddy Yang, I'm not blaming you. You exercise regularly now and maintain your figure. Although you haven't lost too much weight, at least you haven't become fatter. Yang Yi smiled, rubbed Lan Xian's little head and said, and don't worry. When you grow taller, your body will suddenly become taller and longer. At that time you won't feel fat. Xi still believed in her father's words. She began to worry and looked at her father worriedly, asking, then Papa, what should we do? Xiaoya can't get fat anymore. I know, we can also let Xiaoya exercise. Lan Xian pushed herself and the bird, excitedly shouting in front of Yang Yi. Only when she exercises can she be fed to the little bug. Yes, we can do that. Xi's eyes also lit up. How are you going to let Xiaoya exercise? Yang Yi asked curiously. He suddenly felt that if the two little girls discussed it by themselves, they might have some good ideas. Shishi looked at Lan Xian, as if she was waiting for Lan Xian to come up with an idea. After all, this idea was proposed by Lan Xian. That's right, if Xiaoya doesn't exercise, she will starve. Lan Xian rolled her eyes and said, but her logic seemed to be a little wrong. But this time, without Yang Yi saying anything, Shishi pulled Lan Xian and said actively, no, Xian, Papa is asking, how should Xiaoya exercise? Lan Xian scratched her head and said hesitantly, we can let Xiaoya run. We can let Xiaoya come out, and then take the little bug in front, and it will run over. Only when it runs over and runs far away can it be eaten. When Yang Yi was still thinking that Lan Xian was very smart, Shishi's eyes lit up and said happily, I know. That's what the great demon king will do. He will put good-looking grass and carrots in front, and then its horse will run. The great demon king? It seemed to be a popular cartoon recently, and Shishi also watched it. Hee, that's right, I also learned it from Demon King Lan Xian was ecstatic. Well, after all, Xiaoya is too young. If you let it out of the cage, we can only let Xiaoya play outside when we're all free and lock Xiao Guai and the others in the cage temporarily. Yang Yi suggested. Yes. Xiaoya needs to be in the cage to be safe. Cici quickly nodded. Is it not safe in Shishi's room? Lan Xian asked puzzledly. In Shishi's room, you can't let the little bird run out. Yang Yi originally wanted to say that it was unhygienic, but he thought about it and used a more acceptable way of saying, think about it, Xiaoya's body is not recovered yet, and Shishi's room has a balcony and a window. Xiaoya is not sensible. What if she runs out and falls downstairs? She is not agile yet, so she can't fly. She will fall and become minced meat. Shishi and Lan Xian trembled. Shishi quickly shook her head and said, Then I don't want Xiaoya to come out. But, what should we do? Lan Xian asked in confusion. You can use your imagination. Yang Yi smiled and handed the birdcage back. He patted them on the shoulder and said, Think about it, how can we let Xiaoya get good exercise in the cage? Okay. Although it was a little troublesome to think about it, Shishi and Lan Xian still felt that it was very fun. Under the signal of their father, they smiled sweetly and chattered while carrying Xiaoya's birdcage upstairs. Yang Yi touched his chin, as if he heard Xiaoya's sad cry. She was really as miserable as Lan Xian in the past. Chapter 1070. Yang Yi shook his head and turned around to chat with Lan's Hao Kai, who could not drag his daughter home. He did not notice that there was a small figure following behind his sisters as they climbed up the stairs. My sister is the most interesting person in the world. No one knew when it had started, but little rascal had quietly developed such an awareness. Perhaps it was because he had grown up, but Tong Tong did not want to be lonely and wanted his own playmates. However, his mother and father would not play with him every day. Instead, his sister, who was also a child, was more willing to play with him. Especially on the weekends, when his sister was at home, little Momo felt that he was very happy. He could play ball with his sister, and he could also draw with his sister. Although Tong Tong's drawing was not really drawing and could only be described as abstract doodles with dots and lines, he liked the feeling of drawing with his sister. This was because when he saw his sister drawing, he felt that he was as good as her. Of course, Tong Tong always used his sister's crayons and colored pencils, so he caused a lot of trouble. For example, he would accidentally break his sister's beautifully sharpened pencils, causing his sister to complain and grumble. Of course, the feeling of causing trouble was not good. He looked at his sister nervously, who was a little angry. However, Tong Tong was happy that although his sister was angry, she would forgive him in the end. She even helped him sharpen the broken pencils again. Not only did Tong Tong like to play with his sister, but he also admired his sister. This was because she had a lot of friends who often came to play with her at home. Tong Tong liked this kind of lively and fun atmosphere, so he always liked to follow behind his sister. He never got tired of chasing after his sister's footsteps. Unfortunately, his sister had to go to school. Tong Tong went to bed early at night, so he did not have many opportunities to play with his sister from Monday to Friday. Although Tong Tong followed his mother to the company or other workplaces, and experienced many new things during the day, he would still eagerly wait for his sister to come home. Tong Tong was very happy to see her sister back, even though her sister's attention was on the little bird. Today, little mommy was wearing a pair of black trousers and a black t-shirt. However, this was nothing. Mommy was afraid that he would catch a cold, so she even made him wear a blue hooded jacket. The zipper was pulled up to his chest, just enough to wrap around his round little belly. Just now, little Momo didn't understand why her sisters wanted to go upstairs and were called back down by her father, so the little guy stood at the side. Her chubby little face with baby fat didn't reveal any expression. Her rosy little mouth naturally pouted, and her pair of big, round, spirited eyes stared intently at her sisters as they chattered. His two small hands were naturally placed by his side and slightly raised. This appearance made him look a little ignorant, but it was also extremely cute. Finally, the sisters went upstairs. Little Momo also broke away from her observing state and grinned happily. Look at what the sisters are doing upstairs. The little guy, who didn't like wearing slippers, grabbed the railing of the stairs barefooted and walked up the stairs one step at a time, full of vitality. Shi and Lon Xian didn't notice what was going on behind them. They giggled and ran upstairs with the birdcage in their arms. Lon Xian even shouted, "Quick, go in and close the door. Don't let the cat run in." Hee Xian air, don't shout so loudly. Shi also laughed and said, "Xiao Guai is going to hear us." Therefore, when Tong Tong climbed upstairs and arrived at his sister's bedroom, he was surprised to find that the door was closed. Fortunately, Tong Tong knew how to knock on the door. The little guy went up to the door and raised his two chubby little palms up high. He slammed the door and called out in his baby voice, "Sister." After a while, the door to the master bedroom was opened. However, it was only opened a crack. Shishi's beautiful big eyes appeared and Lon Xian's loud voice came from behind. "Be careful. Be careful. There's an attack. This little girl is so crazy. What kind of TV shows did she watch recently?" Shishi had already recognized Tong Tong. She opened the door and smiled at Lon Xian. "No, there's no Xiao Guai. It's just my little brother." "Okay." Lon Xian, who was ready for a fight, sighed regretfully and put down the pillow. Tong Tong didn't know the danger, but he was at ease because his sister held his little hand. Tong Tong's little hand was held by his sister, which made him feel safe. "Little brother, are you coming to see Xiaoya too?" "Oh yeah, you haven't seen Xiaoya yet." Shishi pulled her little brother into the room and closed the door. Then, she brought him to see Xiaoya excitedly. In order to let her little brother see clearly, Shishi was very considerate and moved the birdcage to the ground. This way, Tong Tong could squat down and see Xiaoya face to face. Chirp chirp. The brown-headed crow was a very lively bird. After going through all kinds of hardships and setbacks, it could finally rest for a while. It was still jumping around in the cage and turning its head. Perhaps it was also looking at its new environment. Tong Tong squatted beside his sister and looked curiously at the furry little guy with his round eyes. He looked at his sister and Xian Air, who were discussing something. Lon Xian didn't stay on the bed. She climbed down and sat on the floor like Shishi. Then she continued the topic with great interest. "Shishi, I have an idea. I don't have a cat at home, so I can lock up my dog. Then Xiaoya can exercise in my house," Lon Xian said. "But you have a big swimming pool at home, and Xiaoya can't swim. What should we do?" Shishi followed her father's idea and thought about it carefully. "That's true." Lon Xian scratched her head. Shishi looked at Xiaoya, who was jumping up and down on the wire stairs. Suddenly, her eyes lit up and she said happily, "I know, Xianer, we can let Xiaoya exercise in the cage." "What?" Shishi smiled and gestured with her slender little fingers to Lon Xian. "That's it. We use a rope to hang the little bug here. Then, Xiaoya will run up the stairs to catch the little bug. Then we put the little bug down, and Xiaoya will run down again. Then we pull the little bug up, and Xiaoya will run upstairs. Then it can exercise." "How do we hang the little bug up and put it down?" Lon Xian asked, puzzled. In fact, it required pulleys. But she didn't understand. Her idea was a little off track. In fact, the little girl's active little brain even thought of something else. She hesitated and said, "You can use Xiao Guai's toy. Xiao Guai's toy can be moved around on the rope. Then Xiao Guai will have to jump to play with it." This was another way to play with the spring rope. No matter what, Shishi's wild imagination still made Lan Xian feel that it was unfathomable. Lan Xian found it hard to understand, so she didn't bother to probe further. She simply showed her admiration and praised, "Wow, Shishi, you're so awesome." No. I also want to ask my papa how to make it more fun." Sisi still wasn't very confident. The pattern in her mind kept changing. She scratched her head in embarrassment and smiled. "All right, I'll be fine." Tong Tong blinked his eyes. Looking at his sister's smiling face, he couldn't help but grin and laugh. From Tong Tong's perspective, although his sister and Xianair didn't put him in the center and still focused on the little bird, it didn't matter. He felt that squatting beside his sister with bare feet, he was very involved. Naturally, he also felt a sense of accomplishment and was very happy when his sister laughed. Chapter 1071. At the north gate of Jiangqing Media University, which was also commonly known as the back gate, an inconspicuous silver-white sedan slowly drove out of the gate. It passed by an old bicycle repair shop, and then, as if it had crossed a barrier, it arrived at a world full of flowers in spring. "Wow, it's so beautiful. There are so many flowers." In the car, a young lady skillfully lowered the rear window and exclaimed in surprise, "Little brother, look! This is the place where I used to live with Daddy." That's right, sitting in the back of the inconspicuous sedan was Shishi and Tong Tong. Yang Yi had to come to the cafe to discuss something with Ding Xiang and Guizi, so he brought along Shishi and Tong Tong, who wanted to go out with their father and sister. Murphy didn't come, as she asked Yang Yi to send her to the company. She had a concert in Chengdu next week, and she felt that she needed to find the feeling of singing in the recording studio after resting for a while. Moreover, Yang Yi came out with the principle of keeping a low profile, which was why he drove an inconspicuous sedan. If he and Murphy showed up at the same time, they would be too conspicuous. However, the sea of flowers outside the coffee shop at the corner of the street still gave Cece, who had not been here for a long time, a big surprise. Looking at the colorful flowers competing with each other, and the dazzling array of flowers in the flower bed, the little girl's eyes revealed a look of delight. However, Tong Tong, who was summoned by his sister without looking back, was a little sad. He also wanted to be like his sister and see the beautiful sea of flowers. However, he was too young, and he was still sitting in the child safety seat. His small stature didn't allow him to look over his sister's head to see the scenery. Tong Tong tried his best to stick his head out and look, but he could only see a little color at the corners. Tong Tong had no impression of where his sister and father lived. After all, he was already living in a villa when he was born. Yang Yi, who was driving in the front, heard Shishi's praise and said with a smile, "These flowers were planted by your aunt, Sister Ding Xiang and Sister Sugar Cube." It was probably a whimsical idea that Sugar Cube came up with last winter, but Yang Huan thought it was a good idea. After discussing it with Ding Xiang and the others, they decided to plant flowers in the flower bed outside the coffee shop, as well as the bushes and weeds near the dam. What's more, they didn't plant the delicate flowers that could be bought from the flower shops. Instead, they learned from their classmates at Jiangnan Agricultural University, which was also in the university town. They specifically picked garden flowers that were more ornamental, bought a large number of well-cultivated flower seedlings, and planted them in batches when spring came. Yang Yi knew about this. Yang Huan had told him that he wanted to sponsor a sum of money, but he didn't expect that Yang Huan would reject him. This girl had earned a sum of money by acting and filming her own show. Then, she started to generously invest in the sea of flowers. Ding Xiang also wanted to invest money, but Yang Huan rejected her. Yang Yi didn't expect these three girls to have such perseverance. At most, they would ask Guizi to come over and help, or Lu Xiaoshu and Miao Chuan would lend a helping hand. However, such a large area was planted by them in bits and pieces of time, bit by bit. But it wasn't hard to understand. Ding Xiang was definitely a hard-working person. Although Sugar Cube's family was slightly better than Ding Xiang's, she was still an ordinary family. If she was a student from a small place and came to Jiangqing to study, she wouldn't have to work in the cafe if she was from a good family. So Sugar Cube was also a very hardworking girl. Yang Huan looked rich and had a powerful background. She had a billionaire brother behind her back. No matter what, she was a rich girl who didn't have to worry about food and clothes, and could even spend money freely. But she had only been living a good life recently. In the past, when she was in her hometown or went back to her hometown during festivals, Yang Huan still had to do farm work. So it wasn't impossible for the three girls to take on most of the work and plant all these flowers. When Yang Yi came at the end of February, these flowers were just seedlings that had been planted not long ago. But after all, they were seedlings that had been cultivated by the Agricultural University. After 2 months of care and bathing in the spring breeze by the Grand Canal, they finally bloomed and became a new landscape of the Media College of Jiang City. So there was an endless stream of students who came to take photos. Naturally, the cafe's business was much better. There were many customers in the cafe, but Yang Yi wasn't worried that he wouldn't have a place to sit, because his exclusive booth was still there. Boss. Sugar Cube saw him walk in with the birdcage in one hand and Tong Tong in the other. She was so surprised that she almost screamed. Luckily, she covered her mouth in time. In the past, many people came to the coffee shop because of Yang Yi. After all, many small celebrities and newbies who had yet to make their debut wanted to meet Yang Yi here on purpose. They wanted to look for a small opportunity that was very unlikely. Although their thoughts were understandable, Yang Yi was still annoyed by them. So Yang Yi was forced to stay at home and drink coffee. After being ignored for more than a year, the popularity of the cafe at the corner of the street finally died down. Although many customers were students from various colleges in the university town who came to take photos, if they knew that Yang Yi was here, they would definitely bring a lot of trouble to Yang Yi. So Sugar Cube quickly covered her mouth. Seeing that she didn't attract too much attention, she quickly went forward and invited Yang Yi to his exclusive booth. Let's go, we'll go see the flowers later. I'll ask little auntie to take you out to play, okay? Yang Yi smiled and called out to the little girl behind him, who was still looking back reluctantly, carrying a bird cage and bringing 2 children with him. This combination seemed a little out of place among the many college students who came to take photos. But the interesting thing was that Yang Yi didn't deliberately cover his face. He deliberately dressed up in a more mature way, which made him look like a middle-aged man. With the 2 little guys and the bird cage, Yang Yi looked more like a middle-aged greasy uncle. Many girls who were prettily dressed and holding their phones were sitting by the window taking selfies. When they heard the commotion, they glanced in Yang Yi's direction and lost interest. Let's have a cup of mandelin. Do you still have coffee beans? Yang Yi said with a smile. Sugar Cube nodded and asked in a low voice. Boss, do you want me to call Sister Huan or Sister Ding Xiang? Yang Yi raised his hand and looked at his watch. He smiled and said, No, I've already set a time with them. But I'm half an hour early, so they'll be here later. Yang Huan and Ding Xiang weren't upstairs. Yang Huan had a public elective class on the weekend, while Ding Xiang had to find her supervisor to hand in her thesis. When Yang Yi called them, they just happened to be out and would come back around 11 o'clock. This was nothing. It was about half an hour of waiting. Yang Yi wasn't impatient. Sugar Cube nodded and walked out of the booth. She pulled the screen for Yang Yi and the others. At this time Cici couldn't sit still. She went to her father's side, pulled his sleeve and whispered, Papa, I want to go out and play, and then Xiaoya can also come out and play. She must like flowers very much. Chapter 1072. They had just sat down. Why couldn't they wait? However, before Yang Yi could respond, Tong Tong heard his sister's words and became excited. He reached out to pull his sister's sleeve, and then crawled on the sofa. He mumbled in a childish voice, Let's go out and play. Yang Yi raised his eyebrows slightly and said with a smile, Mommy, you can't do this. Daddy doesn't allow it, and you want to pull your sister and run? Also, sister, let's go out later, okay? Just now, I asked Big Sister Sugar to bring us coffee and milk. You have to respect other people's work. Let's drink something first, and then go out to play. In fact, this was just an excuse. Yang Yi just wanted to test Xishi's temper. He couldn't be obedient to her all the time. This would spoil the little girl, until she developed a princess syndrome. The effect was good. After Yang Yi finished speaking, Xishi was a little reluctant, but she still nodded obediently and said softly, "Okay." Tong Tong was a little reluctant, but since his sister didn't raise the flag of protest with him, the little boy persisted for a while and then gave up. Fortunately, Sugar Cube soon came over with coffee and milk. On her plate, there were also a few small mousse cakes that children liked to eat for Xishi and Tong Tong. Xishi clapped her hands happily when she saw these small cakes of different shapes and exquisite workmanship. The little girl forgot her reluctance just now and thanked Big Sister Sugar sweetly. "Little brother can't eat too much cake. Xishi, share one with him. You can eat the rest later when you come back from playing." After Sugar Cube left, Yang Yi divided the 3 small plates with a smile. The remaining 2 plates were placed further away, and Yang Yi pushed one of the plates to the 2 little guys. "But if I don't eat it, will it go bad?" Xishi raised her head and asked her father. Xishi liked to eat cake, but she wasn't as crazy as Lan Xian. As long as she saw it, she couldn't bear to put it down. Xishi still had some self-control. For her, having something to eat was enough. Now the little girl was only worried that the cake would melt. "No, there's air conditioning in the cafe now. It's okay to leave it for a while. We can come back to eat later," Yang Yi said with a smile. "All right then." Xishi wanted to share a piece of cake with her brother. This was not a big deal, but the cake was indeed a little small. Mousse cakes were originally exquisitely made, and there were probably only a few mouthfuls. If it were Lan Xian, she would definitely be reluctant to share. However, Xishi was different. She was still very concerned about her younger brother. As a matter of fact, Xishi began to hold a small spoon and excitedly gestured on the small mousse cake. Her left hand was also on Tong Tong's shoulder as she asked, "Little brother, how much do you want to eat?" "So much? And so much?" Tong Tong was short. If he sat on the sofa, his little head would not be able to reach the sofa. His father took off his shoes for him, so he wore his little socks and stepped on the sofa. This way, he could communicate with his sister. "So much." Looking at the delicious cake, Tong Tong swallowed his saliva, opened his hands, gestured wildly, and said happily, "So much." "No, we only have 1 piece of cake." Xishi tilted her little head, hesitated for a moment and said, "How about I eat a little more and you eat a little less? Because you're a child, and I'm much older than you." Yang Yi leisurely sipped his coffee as he watched the 2 little rascals muttering to each other. Tong Tong did not know whether he understood or not. Anyway, he looked at his sisters, gestured, listened to his sister's rapid muttering, and finally looked at his expression. He seemed to be a little confused, but he still nodded his head in confusion. Thus, Xishi used a small spoon to cut the cake according to the ratio of 4 to 6. "This one is yours, and this one is mine." Xishi giggled as she scooped the small piece onto an empty plate and pushed it towards Tong Tong. Tong Tong blinked his eyes. He was no longer a stupid child. He could differentiate between different colors and shapes of Tong Tong. Naturally, he could tell which was more and which was less. This one, Tong Tong Tong. Tong Tong placed one hand on his sister's shoulder and pointed at the bigger piece of cake with his other hand. He looked at his sister with his big bright eyes and said in a childish voice. Yang Yi watched from the side and was so happy that his heart was about to cramp. Tong Tong's eyes were very pure and clear, but they also seemed to be able to speak. Yang Yi even simulated the little rascal's expression in his heart. The little rascal seemed to be saying, "Sister, don't you feel guilty for giving me so little?" However, it was clear that Xishi did not intend to give Tong Tong a big piece of cake. The little girl waved her hand and said, "No, brother. You want to eat this." Xishi even enthusiastically scooped a small piece of cake from the smaller piece of cake with her small spoon. She brought it to Tong Tong's mouth and said, "Try it. It's delicious. I've eaten it before." Tong Tong was stunned for a moment. However, when the cake was brought to his mouth, he subconsciously opened his mouth and sucked on it with the silver spoon. He began to munch on it. When Yang Yi saw this scene, he seemed to realize something. He raised his eyebrows slightly and continued to observe quietly. Is it delicious? She asked with concern as she held the small spoon in her hand and watched her brother eat. Tong Tong did not speak and could only nod repeatedly to his sister. Now that there was something delicious to eat, he forgot his previous thoughts and was extremely excited. He smacked his lips and stepped on the sofa happily. His two little fists were clenched and swinging excitedly. Then I want to eat it too. She used the small spoon to scoop up her piece of cake and put it in her mouth to taste it. The little girl's eyes immediately narrowed and she praised, "Oh, it's so sweet." When Tong Tong saw that his sister was eating, he was a little anxious. He placed his hand on his sister's shoulder, bent his knees slightly, leaned forward, and opened his mouth as if he was waiting for his sister to feed him. Actually, he could have used the small spoon to eat it himself. Tong Tong already knew how to use a spoon. However, since his sister was feeding him, why would he need to do it himself? Okay, it's your turn now. She excitedly scooped a spoonful of cake for Tong Tong and fed it to him. Immediately, the little guy's big round eyes narrowed in satisfaction. When Yang Yi saw this scene, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. He thought that Tong Tong was not a stupid child, but he did not expect him to be a silly boy. His sister only fed him a few spoonfuls of cake, and he forgot to argue and willingly ate the small portion. Yang Yi originally thought that she and Tong Tong would argue for a while because of the uneven distribution of the cake. Unexpectedly, she easily fooled the little guy. Previously, Yang Yi had thought of many ways to put out the fire. For example, he would let Shi give the bigger portion of the cake to Shi. This was not like Kong Rong giving away a pear. Yang Yi had also planned to give a portion of the cake to Shi as compensation. Yang Yi had only done this to let Shi understand the importance of fair distribution. However, these methods were useless now. Tong Tong was easily handled by his sister. No matter what, Shi and Tong Tong ate the cake, one spoonful at a time. This scene was very heartwarming. When Yang Yi saw the loving interaction between Shi and her little brother, he smiled happily. Chapter 1073. Little brother, you can do it. Xiaoya, you can do it. Aya, Xiaoya, why aren't you running anymore? Shishi's excited and clear voice could be heard from the small patch of grass, surrounded by a sea of flowers at the side of the coffee shop. In between there was even Tong Tong's happy laughter. Following the voice, they saw Yang Yi sitting beside the shrubs filled with blooming purplish-red flowers. His two long legs were stretched out on the grass, and he was extremely relaxed. Moreover, there was a bird cage beside him, but the metal door was open. Yang Yi was smiling as he watched Shi and Tong Tong play on the grass. Shi released Xiaoya from the cage. Xiaoya rarely had the chance to come to such an open space, so naturally, it wanted to flap its wings. Unfortunately, its wings were not fully healed yet, so it could not fly. But that didn't stop it from enjoying the scenery on the grassland. It walked briskly and ran a long distance on the grassland. Then it faced the beautiful flowers, tilted its little head, and used its sharp little mouth to comb its hair. When little Huahua saw that Xiaoya was running so fast, he grinned and chased after her with his chubby little legs. His little butt, which was wrapped in diapers and looked like a bag, was also shaking. It was extremely cute. Thus, Cici excitedly took on the role of the little referee. However, from the looks of it now, Xiaoya seemed to have noticed little Tao Wu's pursuit. Perhaps it also knew the power of the little brat. When little Tao Wu came closer, it spread its legs and ran around the bushes quickly. Only after it had opened up a certain distance did it stop again. As if it was provoking it proudly, it jumped and chirped. Ding Xiang returned to the coffee shop a little earlier. After hearing Fong Tang's directions, she quickly went around the sea of flowers and walked over. Brother Yang, why are you looking for me? Ding Xiang asked curiously. Normally, Yang Yi rarely looked for her. After Ding Xiang became a manager, she basically contacted Mo Xiaowan or other people in the company for work-related problems. Whenever Yang Yi had any problems, he would look for Yang Huan or Guizi. Why did he specially come to the coffee shop to look for her today? Ding Xiang, how do you feel about your current job? Are you busy? Yang Yi smiled and asked Ding Xiang to sit down. It just so happened that they were separated by a thick sea of flowers. Moreover, they were at the side of the coffee shop. Unlike the road outside, where students were taking photos, Yang Yi felt that it was quite secluded. Moreover, he could also take care of Xixi and Tong Tong. Therefore, he did not choose to return to the coffee shop to talk. Ding Xiang was a little confused. She did not know the meaning of Yang Yi's question. However, she was an honest person and did not deliberately play tricks. She directly shook her head and said, "I'm not very busy. In fact, I feel that I have plenty of time now. Huan Huan and Xiaoguo's schedule is not complicated. Other than some audition invitations that need to be arranged, the rest is all routine work. Compared to Sister Min, my workload is considered much less." The Sister Min she was talking about was the company's newly promoted agent, Liang Min. She used to be Yang Yi's and Murphy's assistant. However, she did not have much work to do. Now that she had obtained an agent's license, Mo Xiaowan arranged for her to be Qianli Chuanshu's agent. Of course, Ding Xiang was not being modest. Compared to Qianli Chuanshu, who had just debuted as a singer, Yang Huan and Guozi, who were still in the part-time state, had much simpler schedules. For example, Yang Huan and Guozi did not need to participate in commercial activities or shoot commercials to promote themselves and earn more money. Other than auditions and acting, they only had to record and promote the Extreme Challenge. These arrangements were too simple. Ding Xiang, who was very smart, only needed an hour a day to deal with them in an orderly manner. Moreover, she still had a lot of time to work on her final year's graduation thesis and thesis defense work. She also had a lot of time to be dragged by Guozi to watch movies, go to the park. Anyway, it was all about romance and love. Although these times were wonderful, Ding Xiang, who was used to hard times, was very uneasy. She always felt that she was wasting her time. She felt that she had not made any substantial progress in the past year, nor had she made any substantial achievements. Moreover, when Ding Xiang was alone, she would occasionally feel a little lost, as if she could not find her life goal. What was her goal now? To help Yang Huan and Guozi realize their dreams? Perhaps this counted as to win the approval of Guozi's family? Perhaps this should not be called a goal. It would be more appropriate to call it a challenge for her and Guozi's relationship. However, whether this counted or not, these goals belonged to others. What about her own goals? Of course, Ding Xiang did not tell Guozi about her confusion. She felt that this was a kind of negative thought, and she should not mention it to affect Guozi's mood. Perhaps if she was a little busier, she would not feel lost, right? Just like when she was a waitress at the coffee shop on the corner of the street, she was busy doing part-time jobs every day. She was busy going to classes, and her goal was to earn money. Those days were very fulfilling and very happy. However, the Hua brothers did not have any jobs now. And Mo Xiaowan often went shopping with Xiao Ai when she was bored. Ding Xiang could not tell Mo Xiaowan to fire Liang Min. And then Ding Xiang could do the work of 3 managers by herself, right? Ding Xiang briefly introduced her current situation to Yang Yi, and also said that she wanted to do more work. Yang Yi touched his chin and smiled. "I see. Actually, to be honest, I was thinking of letting you be Xiaoguo's manager, and finding another manager for Huan Huan." Before Yang Yi could finish, Yang Huan, who happened to come around, heard him. She cried out in surprise, "Why?" Yang Huan was actually very curious as to why Yang Yi came to look for Ding Xiang. She had come back from the classroom, dropped her bag, and excitedly came looking for him. However, she did not expect to hear such a short conversation. Not letting Ding Xiang be her manager? Yang Huan and Ding Xiang were as close as sisters. She was used to Ding Xiang helping her sort out her work arrangements. Now that she heard Ding Xiang's words, she became excited. "Big brother, Sister Ding Xiang is doing well. Why don't you let her be my manager?" Yang Huan was so close to shouting that Ding Xiang would be her manager no matter what. Fortunately, Yang Huan found a bit of reason in her excitement. She remembered that her brother was not the kind of person who would get rid of a donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. He was quite affectionate. Yang Yi smiled and wanted to explain. However, at this time, Xixi saw Yang Huan and excitedly rushed over, calling her little auntie. She even wanted to drag Yang Huan to see her little girl. Tong Tong followed suit and hugged Yang Huan's leg with a smile. Their conversation was interrupted for a while. It was not until Yang Huan coaxed the two little fellows and promised that he would play with them after the conversation that Yang Yi was able to continue. There's a reason why I want Ding Xiang to be Xiaoguo's manager. If she were not with Xiaoguo, I would have directly transferred you, because I have another important job for you, Yang Yi said. Moreover, I believe that you will like this job. It suits you very well, and will be helpful for you and Xiaoguo. Chapter 1074. A job that was suitable for Ding Xiang and that she would like? Yang Yi's words were very tantalizing. Not only was Ding Xiang surprised, but even Yang Huan was curious. She quickly asked, "What kind of job is it?" "Brother, don't keep us in suspense. Do you know that Sahara Online Mall recently acquired one Jia and reorganized it into a new Sahara Taobao Online Mall?" Yang Yi asked with a smile. Yes. Ding Xiang was stunned for a moment before she nodded. In her line of work, she had to read the newspaper. Yang Huan looked around to make sure that no one was eavesdropping on their conversation. She then lowered her voice and laughed. "I know that too. Brother, don't you have some shares in Sahara Online Mall? The media doesn't even know about you. They're only guessing Brother Lance Hao Kai's identity." Yang Yi didn't respond to Yang Huan's sneaky smile. Instead, he ignored her and asked Ding Xiang, "How much do you know about this new Taobao Online Mall? Tell me what you think of this C2C model. I remember that you majored in electronic media. Although you didn't major in e-commerce, you should have some courses related to e-commerce." Ding Xiang was caught off guard by Yang Yi's question. However, her brain worked quickly. She recalled the description of the Taobao Online Mall in the newspaper, and combined it with the courses she had taken before and the economics and management books she had read in order to find a better job in the future. After a while, she had a draft in her mind. She spoke seriously to Yang Yi as if she was in an interview. "Brother Yang, I remember that the C2C model in the newspaper refers to the business model of direct transactions between individuals. It's a bit like when I sold some small goods at the temple fair." Ding Xiang spoke methodically. Moreover, as she spoke, she quickly conceived and enriched the content and basis that she wanted to talk about in her mind. It could be said that she talked nonstop and had no intention of stopping at all. After all, Yang Yi had asked a question that covered a wide range of topics. But as Yang Huan listened, he realized that he didn't understand. Furthermore, Yang Huan did not want to waste her time thinking about it. She was not interested in conversations that were filled with technical jargon. It was just like how she did not want to face her teachers, textbooks, and test papers every day when she was in high school. Soon, she felt bored. The girl yawned and then turned her head to the side in boredom. Xishi's side was much more interesting. When Yang Huan looked over, she saw that the two little fellows were looking into the bushes with their little butts sticking out of their cheeks. Little Momo squatted beside her sister and looked inside curiously. Then Sisi knelt down on the grass with her front body on the grass. As she looked inside, she stretched out her thin little arms, wanting to take something out. "What are you doing?" "Xishi, don't put your hand in. Be careful not to cut your hand." Yang Huan quickly walked over and held Xishi's arm as she tried to persuade her. Sisi struggled to move on the grass. She retracted her arm and propped herself up from the ground. She pointed at the bushes and pouted her little mouth as she said to her little aunt, "No, it's Xiaoya who ran in." "Yes, yes." Tong Tong stood up and looked up at his auntie. He nodded in agreement with his sister. Although he was not good at speaking, he was very good at using words and phrases. Xiaoya ran inside. Yang Huan suddenly remembered that Xishi and Tong Tong had pulled on her trousers and introduced the bird to her. "Hey, didn't I tell you just now? It's safer to keep the bird in a cage." Although Yang Huan complained, she still showed a positive attitude. She rolled up her sleeves and smiled. "It's okay. Move aside. I'll catch it for you." It was easy for the agile Yang Huan to catch a bird. Moreover, Xiaoya did not want to run away. It was just a natural instinct. When it entered the bushes, it buried its head in its work. It pecked at the petals and leaves on the soil to look for little bugs hidden below. Soon Yang Huan caught Xiaoya, She held it gently with one hand and pulled it out. Wow. Shishi looked at Yang Huan in surprise and exclaimed happily, "Auntie, you're amazing." Leaving aside how Yang Huan played with Shishi and Tong Tong, Yang Yi and Ding Xiang talked about the real issue. That's right. Taobao's mall model not only provides a platform for merchants to sell directly to customers, but also helps ordinary people who want to open shops to sell their products. You mentioned it just now, and it's very comprehensive. For example, it can save them the expensive rent in the real world and allow them to sell their products to more customers. Yang Yi first praised Ding Xiang's point of view and then said, "But you may not have considered one point. That is, our shopping mall model on Taobao can not only help some people who already intend to open their own shops, but it may also help some farmers who don't have much contact with the internet now, as well as farmers and mountain people in poor mountainous areas who rarely go to due to transportation and communication reasons." Yang Yi's last sentence was like a bright lamp that lit up Ding Xiang's eyes. Ding Xiang's IQ was indeed outstanding. She immediately understood what Yang Yi might need to spend a lot of time explaining clearly. Brother Yang." Ding Xiang trembled with excitement and asked, "Do you mean that the villagers in our Meng Stockade village can also sell some of the dried goods that they usually collect on the mountain, or some of the vine products that they weave themselves?" "That's right." Yang Yi nodded with appreciation and said, "Do you remember that I told you that there are some old people in your village who weave very delicate vine products, even though they use very simple tools?" "Yes, but they can't be shipped out. Even if they sell it in the county, they can't sell it for much money. They've been in the county for too long, and the people in the county don't lack these things." Ding Xiang nodded. "But if you broaden your vision and look at the whole country," Yang Yi said, "someone will definitely be willing to buy it. They can do it in Jiangcheng. The vine products here are sold in boutiques. They're very expensive." Ding Xiang hesitated for a moment and said, "It's just that. I've thought about it before, but it's very difficult. The cost of taking them out and selling them in Jiangcheng is too high. The transportation, manpower, material resources, and shop rent are all very high. But if we sell them in the Sahara, it's definitely possible." Ding Xiang took a deep breath and looked at Yang Yi with burning eyes. She said excitedly, "Brother Yang, I want the people in our village to open a shop in the shopping mall on Taobao." "That's for sure, but it's not possible now." Yang Yi poured cold water on Ding Xiang's enthusiasm. Ding Xiang was stunned for a moment and looked at Yang Yi in confusion. "Why not? Brother Yang, our village can also use the phone now. At most, we can ask the people in the county to help us open a network line based on the phone line. I can pay for it." Chapter 1075. Just like how she wanted to help the children in the village go to school by herself in the past, Ding Xiang now had a pure and innocent heart. But why did Yang Yi still pour cold water on her and tell her that it was not feasible at this stage? It's simple. If your village wants to open a Taobao online shop, you have to consider a lot of things. First, the villagers in the village have to consider Taobao and e-commerce. After all, they have never been in contact with online shopping and don't even know what the internet is. Will they believe that this illusory thing can help them make money? Yang Yi counted on his fingers and spoke frankly with Ding Xiang. Yang Huan was originally going to help Shishi and the others catch the little girl and put her back into the cage. She was about to come back to see what work Yang Yi had arranged for Ding Xiang, but she soon realized that the topic they were talking about was still very boring. So, she continued walking back to Shishi and Tong Tong. She chuckled and said, "Shishi, Auntie is here to play with you. This is such a comfortable grass field. Let's take off our shoes and dance, okay?" How could it not be okay? Shishi and Tong Tong's happy cheers could be heard from the other side. Yang Yi glanced at Yang Huan, who was barefooted and playing with the two little ones on the grass field as if she was dancing. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, but he did not greet her. He turned his head and continued to analyze the problem with Ding Xiang. "You mentioned it just now. In your village, transportation, and even internet communication are not small problems." Yang Yi said, "This is the second obstacle I want to talk about. It's a very big problem that needs time to solve. At the very least, We have to wait for the next 2 years for Sahara Express to expand our delivery range and go deep into the villages. How many years did they have to wait? Ding Xiang thought about it and nodded gently. She was a smart person. She knew that there were some obstacles that were very difficult to overcome. Of course, at this time, Ding Xiang's feverish head gradually calmed down and her thoughts became clearer. In addition, after the previous incident with the Education Bureau, I've already told you that it's better to teach a man to fish than to give him a fish. This principle is similar. Don't think about paying for everything yourself. Organize the villagers in the stronghold to open Taobao shops and help them become rich. This approach doesn't necessarily have any benefits. On the contrary, it's easy to cause trouble for yourself. Yang Yi said to Ding Xiang, Big brother Yang, I understand what you mean. It's just that in the stockade, the villagers have no money and no way out. I think with everyone's help, I should also want to contribute to the stockade and help them out of their predicament. Ding Xiang pursed her lips and said with a lonely expression, That's the logic. I'm not stopping you from helping your fellow villagers in your stronghold. I'm doing the same. I also hope that my hometown can become prosperous. However, helping people is also a big problem. How to help them at the right time without bringing trouble to yourself is really worth your time to think about. Yang Yi had a lot to say about this topic. Some time ago, there was a big news in Guangdong province. I don't know if you've been paying attention. It's about a big boss who made a lot of money outside. He went back to his hometown and spent hundreds of millions to build many villas in the village. However, when it came to the allocation, he fell out with the villagers. Fu Jun told Yang Yi about this matter as a joke. At that time, Fu Jun was still a little sad about this matter. After all, he was also a big boss and could understand the grievance and anger in the big boss heart. However, Yang Yi didn't expect Ding Xiang to have actually seen this news. She nodded seriously and said, I know. The cause of this matter was that when the big boss first talked about it, he didn't explain the allocation rules in detail and didn't negotiate well. Later, who knew that people's hearts were unfathomable? Many villagers wanted to get a few more sets. That's right. That's why you see that I'm quite rich now. However, when it comes to helping my hometown, I rarely give money or supplies directly. Instead, I do my best to help them find a way out that suits them and help them become rich on their own. This is also why I said that it's better to teach a man to fish than to give him a fish, Yang Yi said. In the past 2 years, Wudayaku village had changed a lot. Not only were the roads smoothed out, but after the introduction of agricultural machinery, everyone planted more fields and released a portion of their labor force. Some of them went out to work in big cities, while others opened restaurants, wooden furniture stores, and so on in the county. Moreover, it was said that after Mu Chang'an, Li Shipo, and a few other young people saw Geng Sha's inspirational example, they were ambitious and wanted to go to the capital to act as extras and make a name for themselves in the entertainment industry. However, Yang Chonggui felt that they weren't skilled enough, and that it would be embarrassing to go out rashly. So he restrained them and made them practice more martial arts. In any case, everyone had their own development. However, everyone's pockets had been enriched in the past few years, and they had begun to communicate and understand more about the outside world. When Yang Yi returned during the spring festival, he saw that everyone in Wudayaku village was beaming with joy. Overall, they showed a positive attitude. Of course, Yang Yi's role in this was not as big as his younger brother Yang Yi. After all, many things were done by Yang Yi and Yang Qing. My suggestion to you is that when the time is right, you should teach the villagers in your village how to open a shop, but don't help them open a shop. Teach them the skills to make a fortune on their own. After that, they will have to rely on their own hands to create wealth for themselves. Yang Yi smiled. Of course, this matter can't be rushed. Ding Xiang nodded honestly like a good student. However, she asked curiously, Then Brother Yang, what kind of work do you want me to do? After talking about so many things that Ding Xiang was very interested in, she also began to look forward to the work that was about to be arranged for her. It's the same as what we talked about just now. The market on Taobao. Its core direction of development is still to provide a broad platform for ordinary people, for those farmers who have products but are worried about not being able to sell them, and for those who are often exploited by purchasers, to directly sell their products on a platform. Yang Yi said, but just like the villagers in your village, many people who have these needs actually have very little understanding of e-commerce and even the internet. What I want you to do is to find a way to teach more people in poor areas to use this platform. Yang Yi took out his phone and showed a few pictures to Ding Xiang. Smiling, he said, this can be considered a semi-charity project. I had originally planned to fund this non-profit foundation of ours myself, but after Fu Jun and your big brother Lan heard about it from me, they also rushed to invest in it. So, as the first step, we donated a total of 200 million to set up this foundation. Ding Xiang read out the name on the screen. Sahara Rural Development Charity Foundation. As the name suggests, the purpose of this foundation is to help the development of rural areas. Why do I say it's semi-charitable? Because what this foundation wants to do is to teach the farmers how to use Taobao market platform and help them get on the fast train of e-commerce. Yang Yi said carefully, this kind of thing obviously has its own selfish motives. After all, it's for the development of Taobao's market, but in the end for the farmers, this is a good thing. Moreover, in the beginning, not only will we teach them knowledge, we will also donate a batch of computer equipment to them. Of course, in the later stages, their development will depend on their own efforts. We are at the stage where the teacher leads the way, but cultivation depends on the individual's efforts. Ding Xiang understood. She smiled happily and said, Brother Yang, this is similar to teaching and supporting farmers. That's right. However, my idea is that our foundation will not only use the current batch of employees transferred from eBay, but also hope to develop some student volunteers in various universities. We will strive to invite some enthusiastic students from local schools to join our ranks of public welfare and go deep into the countryside to teach the local farmers how to fish. Yang Yi said with a smile. This is not just a question of how to do it. What you need to consider is how to set up this framework step by step, so that the entire charity can develop healthily. Of course, in the future, Fu Jun, Brother Lan, and I will continue to donate to our charity foundation and strive to benefit the farmers of our country. Brother Yang, are you talking about the problem that I need to consider? Ding Xiang caught the key point and asked with a little surprise. That's right. I want you to help me set up this foundation. We'll start from scratch. We'll study how to teach, what to teach, how to deal with the relationship with the farmers, and other basic things. Of course, you won't be doing this alone. You have hundreds of young employees transferred from Wanjiayi. Also, you can use a portion of the fund to invite teachers and students from Guangdong Province or our Jiangqing Media University to help with this matter. However, you'll be my representative. As the person in charge of this foundation, you'll be in charge of the overall situation. Ah, you are giving such a big foundation to me? Ding Xiang looked at Yang Yi in surprise. Can I do it? What you are doing is something that no one in this world has ever done before, so I don't know if you can do it, and I don't know if others can do it either. But I trust your character, wisdom, and ability. Yang Yi smiled and said, and think about it. When the time is ripe, the villagers in your village can also use our platform and get the training and help of our foundation to walk a successful path. For this goal, don't you want to set up this foundation now? Starting from scratch was a big challenge for Ding Xiang, but Yang Yi felt that this was also a good development opportunity for Ding Xiang. Moreover, Ding Xiang was such a smart girl. It was too much of a waste of her talent to be a small agent. She might as well come to the foundation and train herself well. Ding Xiang's senior, Mao Peifu, was now a senior executive of Backwave Technology Company and became the third person in the company. Ding Xiang was smarter and more tenacious than her. Plus, she must be very motivated to do this. Yang Yi believed that she would definitely bring him a surprise. Of course, Yang Yi chose Ding Xiang to do this not only because he trusted her, but also because he wanted to help Ding Xiang as a friend and help her win happiness. Chapter 1076. At around noon, in Yang Yi's villa, Shishi had just returned home. She excitedly carried Xiaoya's birdcage up to the second floor, put it down in the bedroom, and ran back down. Little auntie, I'll take you to see the vegetables I planted. They've all grown so tall. Before they even went downstairs, the little girl's energetic voice could be heard from afar. Little Momo didn't have as much energy as his older sister. In the morning, he ran and danced with his older sister on the grass outside the coffee shop. Later, his aunt came to lead them to dance. Little Momo played until he was exhausted. When he came back, he lay listlessly in his mother's arms. He entered his sleepy and weak state half an hour earlier than usual. Even when he heard his sister's excited cry, little Fuchin still couldn't help but raise his little head and turn around to look at his sister, who was holding his little aunt's hand with a smile. Although he also wanted to play with his sister, he really didn't have the strength to. As he watched, he couldn't help but open his little mouth slightly and yawn. Young Huan was talking to Mo Fei. In the company, she often met her brother and sister-in-law at some activities. However, because she was busy with the filming of shows and movies, she hadn't come to Yang Yi's place for about a month. This was also the reason why when Cece saw that she rarely came to Yang Yi's place, she wanted to take her to see some of her achievements. Go play with Shishi. Look at her. She likes to pester you. Murphy chuckled and said to Yang Huan, who looked a little helpless. As soon as Shishi dragged Yang Huan away, the security system notified Guizi that he was here. He was called over by Yang Yi. On the one hand, he was here to be a guest. On the other hand, the matter that Yang Yi and Ding Xiang discussed involved Guizi. That's about it. That's why I want to take Ding Xiang, to be precise, most of her energy out of Hua Yi Brothers, and then help me with this public welfare fund. However, she is still your agent. I asked her, and she said that you don't have a lot of work to do. She can handle it. In the kitchen, Yang Yi skillfully cut a large piece of tender, red raw beef and described his plan to Guizi in detail. He told Guizi about the work and the nature of the work. Ding Xiang was at the sink by the side, silently picking vegetables. She was actually a little nervous. After all, she used to spend a lot of time and energy on Guizi. Although she was still Guizi's agent, if she became the person in charge of the charity fund in the future, she would have to devote more energy to it. Would Guizi agree? Would he feel that the time she spent with him was too little, and then he would feel unhappy? Ding Xiang thought this way because she cared. Not only did she care about Guizi's feelings, but she also cared about the job Yang Yi mentioned today. To be honest, Ding Xiang was moved. Although she would definitely face a lot of challenges if she took over the job, Ding Xiang found the goal of her life that she had been worried about for a long time in the vision that Yang Yi described. She wanted to do such a thing. She wanted to help the farmers who lived in the abyss of suffering like her Miao villagers. She also wanted to help the villagers who had helped her in the past when the time was right in the future, so that they could also become rich and live a good life. However, what surprised Ding Xiang was that after listening to Yang Yi's words, Guizi did not have any hesitation, annoyance or resistance. He just handed the plate over, scratched his head, and said to Yang Yi, "Brother Yang Yi, why do you have to ask for my opinion on this matter?" "Sister Ding Xiang, what do you think?" Guizi turned to look at Ding Xiang and asked for her opinion. He said in a gentle voice, "I think that this matter mainly depends on your thoughts. No matter what you decide, I will support you." "You don't object?" Ding Xiang asked, a little surprised. "I don't object. Actually, Brother Yang is right. It's a bit of a waste of talent for you to just be an agent. Also, I think that you should be quite interested in this job." Guizi shook his head and said seriously, "The question that I am thinking about now is whether it will be too hard for you. After all, starting from scratch will be a lot of pressure. Of course, no matter what you choose, I will support you. If there are any challenges, we will face them together." Yang Yi was at the side, pouring cooking wine and sauce to marinate the beef. Listening to their sweet conversation, he could not help but shake his head gently. "I can't stand it." Ding Xiang pursed her lips, a trace of gratification and joy flashed in her eyes, but she still said, "But if I do this job, I won't have that much time to accompany you. Moreover, in the future, there is a possibility that I will have to follow the volunteer team and run into the mountains. Then I will go with you." Guizi patted his chest and boldly said, "As long as I am free, I will go with you. Going to the mountains is also good. I can help you and also lose weight while I am at it." He also casually said a few words of humor. As smart as Guizi was, he had already seen through Ding Xiang's intention. He simply acted free and easy because he did not want to drag his girlfriend down. That's a good idea. Yang Yi was inspired by Guizi. He reached out to touch his chin and said with a smile, "Our fund still lacks an image spokesperson. Why don't the two of you sing and the wife follow?" "No, the wife sings and the husband follows. If you have nothing to do with filming or recording, you can go and do public welfare." Guizi was also a hot-blooded little fatty. He immediately laughed and nodded to Yang Yi saying, "This is good, Brother Yang. I can justifiably accompany Sister Ding Xiang to go sightseeing. You don't have to worry about not having an excuse to tell my family. We are not sightseeing. We are going to do public welfare." Ding Xiang slightly frowned and said, Yes, public welfare." Guizi eagerly went to Ding Xiang's side and helped her wash the vegetables. He said with a smile, "Aren't I learning from Brother Zhu Lian?" He was so angry because of his girlfriend that he hid in the mountains for many years. "Of course, I have to accompany you to face difficulties." Ding Xiang was happy and sweet, but in front of Yang Yi, she was embarrassed to show it too obviously. Her cheeks were a little red, and her eyes were bright. She said with a happy tone, "Don't worry, I will also find a balance and take care of both sides of the work. I will also accompany you to realize your dream of being the best actor." Although the words of these two guys were quite touching, Yang Yi really could not stand the sweetness. He coughed twice and said, "Actually, you don't have to make it sound like you are going to be separated forever. I don't want to let others do this. I specially arranged for Ding Xiang to help because I have considered the future of both of you." Guizi and Ding Xiang turned to look at Yang Yi in surprise. "Last month, Murphy held a concert in Jiangcheng. Xiaogua, didn't your mother also come to watch the live scene? Later, I heard from Huan that Xiao Yan revealed that your mother actually likes Ding Xiang very much, but she wants you to find a girlfriend who is not in the entertainment industry. Of course, it will be better if she has a certain status, right?" "Right," Yang Yi said with a smile. Guizi frowned slightly and muttered unhappily, "Brother Yang, my mother and the others have different ideas from mine. My mother is my mother, and I am me. No matter what they think, I will marry Sister Ding Xiang." Ding Xiang reached out to grab Guizi's hand and signaled him not to be so extreme with her eyes. However, her lips were slightly pale, and she seemed to lack confidence. "Don't worry," Yang Yi said with a smile. "Now that I have asked Ding Xiang to run this fund, it is also an opportunity. Her identity in the entertainment industry is actually just your agent, which can be ignored. However, on the surface, she has an additional identity as the person in charge of the public welfare fund." Guizi and Ding Xiang were both smart people. They understood the meaning of Yang Yi's words and immediately became spirited, especially Guizi. He looked at Yang Yi with bright eyes and some excitement. Yang Yi continued, "Although our foundation has not been widely publicized, it can be said that this is a great public welfare project, just like Zhu Luyan's Hope Primary School project. It is a great public welfare project that will benefit the present and the future. Ding Xiang, do your best and help more farmers to become rich. In the future, your social status will definitely be corresponding to your contributions and will be greatly improved. It won't take too long. We currently have the support of the Guangdong provincial government. Therefore, you can start a pilot program in Guangdong province and learn the tutorial and process of teaching farmers how to open online shops. In the future, the shopping mall on Taobao will be completely popular. Then you can start to expand to the whole country and help more people in need." Yang Yi said with a smile. "I understand. If we do well, Sister Ding Xiang can be nominated for some outstanding youth award in the future," Guizi said with some excitement. "Yes, I can tell you that as long as you do well and help the economy of the poor villages in Guangdong province, the Guangdong provincial government will not treat you badly," Yang Yi said seriously. "Even if there are no awards, I will work hard to do it well." Ding Xiang couldn't help but whisper. Although it sounded a little hypocritical, Ding Xiang was expressing her sincerity. She was not the kind of person who pretended to be serious. "That's true. Let's not talk about those empty words." Yang Yi said with a smile. Let's imagine a scenario. If 1 or 2 years later, the shopping mall on Taobao becomes the mainstream of online shopping, and many farmers in Guangdong province open online shops, the economy will be booming. And Jiangqing City, that is Xiaoguo's father, sees the success of others and wants to introduce this model. In that case, if Guo Zhengyan wanted to learn from Guangdong province, he would definitely have to cooperate with the Sahara Desert like Guangdong province. At that time, he would discover that his son was inextricably linked to the Sahara Desert. This wasn't the most important thing. At that time, when the Sahara Rural Development Public Welfare Fund came to Jiangqing, the one who could contact Guo Zhengyan and cooperate with him would be Ding Xiang, who was already in charge. Ding Xiang could talk about cooperation with Guo Zhengyan on an equal footing. If Guo Zi and Ding Xiang were to be in a relationship, would the Guo family ostracize Ding Xiang because of her background? At that time, Ding Xiang's status would probably be comparable to those second-generation officials and socialites. Moreover, with Guo Zhengyan's upright and plain-spoken character, Ding Xiang, who was engaged in public welfare, would probably be more likable. This was also the main reason why Yang Yi wanted Ding Xiang to be in charge of this public welfare fund. Guo Zi listened to Yang Yi's idea and couldn't help but take a deep breath for Yang Yi's idea. He said, "Big brother Yang, I just wanted to say that since the Taobao model is so good, why don't you recommend it to my father?" It turned out that Yang Yi was digging a hole for Guo Zhengyan to jump into. However, Guo Zi thought too much. Yang Yi laughed and shook his head. He said, "In fact, I didn't recommend it to your father because of you. Now, I'm using the same strategy for Jiangqing, Jiangnan, and even my hometown, Anqing province. Isn't there such a saying? People tend not to cherish what they get too easily." Yang Yi spread his hands and smiled. "I won't hide it from you. The Taobao model is definitely a major trend in the development of e-commerce in the future. I know this is a good thing, but others don't know. In other words, if I take the initiative to deliver it to them, they may not cherish it. On the contrary, when we make achievements and others see how good Guangdong province is, they will seek cooperation with Sahara. This is beneficial to both of us. They will pay more attention to this cooperation. And Sahara can also occupy an advantageous negotiating position," Yang Yi said. "I understand. Business is business. This is very normal." Guo Zi came to a sudden realization and smiled. "No, this is not just a business principle. This principle is also applicable to our public welfare fund." Yang Yi waved his hand and opened the refrigerator. He then said, "Ding Xiang, do you remember the example I told you about the big boss giving a villa to a fellow villager?" Ding Xiang nodded hurriedly. Guo Zi looked over in confusion. Fortunately, when Ding Xiang and Guo Zi were dating, they talked about this news. Ding Xiang pointed it out a little and Guo Zi understood. It's the same when doing public welfare. We need to help others, but we can't take the initiative to ask for help like we are asking for help. Yang Yi said, "If you beg and say that we'll teach you how to open an online shop, other people won't thank you if their online shop does well. Instead, they'll blame you if they don't open it well and lose money, right?" Guo Zi and Ding Xiang nodded gently. "So now, I will let you pilot it in Guangdong province. After all, we have the support of the Guangdong provincial government. It is justified. You can also explore the procedures of the fund, accumulate experience, and avoid detours in the future." Yang Yi said, "In the future, when the shopping mall on Taobao becomes popular, the local government will know that this is a good thing. Our fund will also become famous. At that time, you can start to go national. At that time, the resistance and doubts will be much less." "So that's the case. Brother Yang, you are really thoughtful." Guo Zi and Ding Xiang were very smart, but they were still very young and had not experienced too much intrigue. Now, listening to Yang Yi's endless narration, their faces were full of admiration and respect. However, when Yang Yi, Guo Zi, and Ding Xiang were in the kitchen, preparing lunch and talking, Shishi's exclamation came from outside the kitchen. Chapter 1077. 5 minutes ago, Cece, who was watering her little botanical garden with her little aunt in the yard, talked about the blooming of the radish tassels some time ago. "The flowers have withered. Papa said that we have to wait for the next blooming. We don't know when the next one will be. The little girl said regretfully as she followed Young Huan, who was carrying a watering can. Young Huan smiled and said, "It's okay. Remember, if the radish blooms next time, you must ask me to come and see it." Of course, Young Huan was just joking. She had seen all kinds of crops in the countryside before. She pretended to be curious because she wanted to cooperate with Xi and make her happy. However, the little girl took it seriously. She felt that her aunt really wanted to see the radish blooms. Therefore, the enthusiastic little girl racked her brains to help her aunt realize her dream. Xi's eyes lit up as she thought about it. She said happily to Young Huan, "Aunt, I know. Let me show you the photos." There were still some photos that her father had printed. After saying that, Xi turned around and ran upstairs excitedly. Young Huan couldn't stop her. Who knew that Cici, who had run upstairs in high spirits, would see a scene that made her scream as soon as she entered the bedroom. Xiao Guai was squatting on the table, and the cat was staring at the little girl in the cage. Xi was so happy when she came back that she left Xiaoya's cage on the table and ran downstairs to play with her aunt. She forgot to close the door of the bedroom. And Xiao Guai, who was usually elusive, had actually seized such a coincidental opportunity to appear in the bedroom. Of course, she didn't know if little Guai wasn't interested in Xiaoya, or if it couldn't open the birdcage. Anyway, when Cici ran up, she saw little Guai sizing up Xiaoya with its tail wagging from side to side in boredom. However, because Cici ran over and screamed, little Guai became even more excited. It jumped from the table and landed firmly on the ground with its chubby body. Then, it intimately moved to its little master's side, and used its body to rub against Cici's ankle. However, no matter whether Bab had the intention to violate Xiaoya or not, Xi pouted unhappily. She looked at Xiaoya in the cage and made sure that it was fine. It was just a little scared. Xiaoya, who was usually lively, shrank to the wire fence on the second floor of the cage. Then Xi squatted down and held Bab's chubby face angrily. She said angrily, "Bab, you are not good at all. How can you eat Xiaoya? Xiaoya is our good friend." Bab looked at Xi innocently with its round eyes and thin pupils. Meow. It sounded a little confused. Although nothing major happened, Xi's earth-shattering scream still startled Yang Yi, who was preparing lunch downstairs. His ears were very sensitive, and he could hear Xi scream from afar. Yang Yi thought that something big had happened. He didn't even wash his hands and hurriedly ran upstairs with meat on them. Fortunately, when he ran upstairs, he saw that nothing had happened. Xi was just angrily scolding Bab. "Papa, Bab wants to eat Xiaoya." When the little girl saw her father come upstairs, she immediately felt confident and hurriedly asked him for help. "What should I do? Papa, I don't want Xiaoya to be eaten. Don't think that this is a small matter." The little girl was so anxious that she was about to cry, because she remembered that she had actively applied to the teacher for Xiaoya to be a guest at her house this weekend. If she went back next week and could only carry an empty cage to school, how embarrassed would the little girl be? When she saw the dangerous scene just now, Xi felt that she had let down her classmates and teachers. She didn't take good care of Xiaoya. She couldn't even compare to the class monitor Chao Ruolin, who she didn't trust before. Thinking of this, Xi's heart felt especially uncomfortable. It's okay. Bab is probably just playing a prank. Look, isn't Xiaoya fine?" Yang Yi hurriedly squatted down and hugged Xi to comfort her. Yang Yi knew that his hands were dirty, so he could only think of a way. He used the inside of his forearm to gently stroke the little girl's hair and simply comfort Xi, whose eyes were misty and was about to cry. But I'm still scared. Papa, I'm scared that Xiaoya will really be eaten." Xi said in her father's arms, feeling wronged. Bab, Little Gray, and Little Bun are all very naughty. What Xi was worried about was indeed a relatively big problem. Yang Yi thought carefully, and felt that he used to think that Xiaoya would be able to live in their house safely with the protection of the cage, but now he realized that it didn't seem to be possible. Just like the little goldfish, when they took care of Xiaoya, there were still times when they were careless. Back then, they were careless and forgot to cover the fish tank. Little Bun, that little guy, was actually able to take advantage of the gap and kill a little goldfish. Although domestic cats and dogs didn't have much desire to eat goldfish, birds, or even mice, they were animals after all. Especially Bab and the others, the nature of cats was there. Even if they didn't eat, they had the habit of teasing these prey. Xiaoya was so small, and if she was teased by these guys without restraint, she would probably die. And Xiaoya wasn't a goldfish. If it died, where would Yang Yi find a second Xiaoya for Xixi? Moreover, now that Xixi had grown up a lot and was much smarter, it wouldn't be so easy to fool her. So he had to think of a way. After lunch, Yang Yi accompanied Xixi and carried the birdcage and Xiaoya to Lan Xian's house. Xian, you have to help me take good care of Xiaoya. Xixi reluctantly put Xiaoya down, then pulled Lan Xian's hand, shook her little butt, and said in a sad tone, "It's okay. I've helped you take care of Xiaoya in school. Leave Xiaoya to me, don't worry." Lan Xian was like a big sister, patting her fleshy little chest and said happily, But you have to help me take good care of Bai Bai." Bai Bai was Lan Xian's Samyet. It was much bigger than steamed bun, and was usually quite docile. However, it was said that sometimes Bai Bai wasn't as obedient as its angelic appearance, and sometimes it would be unrestrained. Anyway, Xixi and Lan Xian had discussed on the phone just now. In order to ensure Xiaoya's safety at their house, Xiaoya would temporarily spend the weekend at Lan Xian's house, because Lan Xian only had one dog, so it was easier to move. But cats were troublesome. Xiao Guai and the rest liked to run around. Even if they went to Lan Xian's house, they might sneak back at night, so it was still not safe. So Xiaoya stayed at Lan Xian's house, and this Samyed called Bai Bai was going to be a guest at Xixi's house for 2 days. It didn't matter. After all, Bai Bai was often taken by Lan Xian to play with steamed bun, so it was very familiar with Xixi's house. Yang Yi looked at Xixi's reluctant look, and said with a smile, "Xixi, don't worry. Xiaoya staying at Xian's house is the same as staying at our house, isn't it? It's so close. You can go to Xian's house in the afternoon, play with her, and take care of Xiaoya together." Yes. Lan Xian beamed with joy and said, "Xixi, you can come over and help me feed Xiaoya the bugs." "Aya, what's so scary about that? These are dead bugs that can't be moved." Cici had already forgotten her initial fear. However, it made sense. These worms were all dried worms. Cici had fed Xiaoya a lot of them, so she had already gotten used to it. How could she still feel afraid? The little girl could even use her hands to catch the bugs. She was much braver than before. But Lan Xian still didn't like the appearance of these bugs. Usually, she would use Xixi little tweezers to catch the bugs from a distance. So she pouted and argued, "They're dead, but they're still bugs." After entrusting Xiaoya to Lan Xian, Yang Yi and Xixi brought Lan Xian's Sammy at home. But he didn't know what kind of special reaction Bai Bai's arrival would have. Chapter 1078. Ha ha ha. Yang Yi and Xixi brought the Samyed Whitey home. Steamed Bun ran over and played with Whitey. However, this silly steamed bun was not reserved at all. He wagged his tail, shook his head, jumped up and down, and even cried out excitedly. He was so excited that he was like a young man who saw his crush for the first time. But this was not because of hormones. Steamed Bun and Whitey were both female dogs. Could it be that Steamed Bun also chased after idols? Maybe Whitey, who was as beautiful as an angel, was Steamed Bun's idol dog. Ignoring the excited Steamed Bun, Yang Yi saw that Bai Bai's arrival did not shock or anger the indigenous Steamed Bun. In addition, Xiao Guai and the others were also very calm on the cat tree in the side hall. Yang Yi relaxed. "Be good and play with Steamed Bun. We're going to rest." Yang Yi smiled and patted Whitey, who was also running in circles because of Steamed Bun jumping up and down. After reminding him, he led Xixi upstairs. The little girl was a little listless when it was time for her afternoon nap. The owners all went upstairs. The large space on the first floor became Steamed Bun and Whitey's world. Of course, it would be even better if the 3 eyesores next to them weren't there. Because of Steamed Bun's welcome, Whitey was not very alert to Yang Yi's new environment. After Yang Yi and the others went upstairs, Whitey bent down and lay down comfortably on the corridor in front of the stairs. After all, Whitey was a lot bigger than Steamed Bun. Whether it was because of its fluffy fur or not, when it lay down on the ground, it was like a large white truck in front of Steamed Bun, who was as small as a bumblebee. Steamed Bun had no intention of lying down. He wagged his tail excitedly. The strength of his tail was so strong that it seemed like his but was also twisting. Not only did it run around in front of Bye-Bye, but it also acted like a spoiled brat. One moment it wagged its tail in front of Bye-Bye, and the next moment, it leaned its head over and rubbed against Bye-Bye's head. It was as if it was burrowing its head under Bye-Bye's chest. Then, it stuck close to Bye-Bye and rolled around on the ground. However, this was not enough. After it was done, it jumped up from the ground as if it had endless energy. It ran to the side and lay on the ground to see if Bye-Say had followed it. However, Whitey was a little reserved. It only turned its head, stuck out its tongue, and looked at the bun with a smile. "Why don't you understand what I mean?" Steamed Bun was so anxious that he repeated his previous actions. First, he rubbed his head against Bye-Say's ear. Then he jumped to the door and turned his head to look at Bye-Say. As if he felt that his intentions weren't obvious enough, Bao-Bao arched his buttocks and threw himself on the ground. He turned his head to the door and looked at Bye-Say. If a dog could speak, Steamed Bun would have said, "Do you understand? I mean, go out and have fun. I beg you." Bye-Say was finally moved by Bao-Bao. It got up from the ground and followed behind Bao-Bao. The door to the villa was closed by Yang-Yi, but Bao-Bao and the three cats never needed to open the door. If they wanted to go out or come back to eat, they would go through the dog hole that Yang-Yi had specially installed for them. From the outside of the villa, the originally ordinary door suddenly had a small cover that was painted the same color as the wooden door open. A dog head with short yellow fur poked out. It looked left and right, then easily squeezed half of its body out of the dog hole. It stretched out its front legs, and with a kick of its hind legs, its body jumped out. After Bao-Bao came out, he ran 2 steps away and wagged his tail. He turned his head back to look, as if waiting for Bye-Say to appear. Not long after, a white head squeezed out of the dog hole somewhat awkwardly. After squeezing out, the fluffy hair allowed people to recognize that the white furry ball was Bye-Bye's head. Squeezing through a dog hole could be said to be a relatively new experience for Bye-Say. But Bye-Say still looked around happily before continuing to squeeze out. But it seemed that this small dog hole was a serious test for Bye-Say's huge body. Its fluffy hair had already covered the door of the dog hole, but when it squeezed into its body, Bye-Say, who had shrunk a lot, was still stuck. Bye-Say squeezed out strenuously. Bao-Bao also wagged his tail in front of it and ran back and forth, as if to encourage Bye-Say. But maybe it really couldn't. Its 2 front paws couldn't reach out, and because it tried so hard to get out, part of its front legs were stuck in the dog hole. Gotcha! With a crisp sound, the dog hole's cover was squeezed off by Bye-Say, and the rubber ring was strung on Bye-Say's body. This seemed to give Bao-Bao and Bye-Say some hope, because Bye-Say took the opportunity to squeeze out a little more. But the dog hole wasn't big to begin with, and in the end, Bye-Say still couldn't squeeze out. Now a bigger problem appeared. Bye-Say was stuck in a position where it couldn't move forward or backward. Its hind legs moved, but it found that it couldn't move, no matter how hard it tried. Woo-woo. Bye-Say was dumbfounded, and wailed to Bao-Bao for help. This position was very uncomfortable. Its front legs couldn't touch the ground, its hind legs were slipping, and its stomach was uncomfortable. "I'm going to die, I'm going to die." Steamed Bun was also anxiously pacing back and forth. He tried to bite the dog hole's door cover, as if he thought he could pull Whitey out of the hole. However, only the door cover was pulled. Soon, Steamed Bun broke the rubber band, and the door cover was flung to the ground. But Bye-Say still couldn't move. What should I do? Just as Bao-Bao was anxiously pacing around, Bye-Say, who was stuck in the door hole for a while, showed a strange expression. Then, it was so anxious that it started to flop on the ground, whimpering in fear. What happened? A few minutes ago, when Bao-Bao brought Bye-Say out, Little Gray, who was lying on the cat tree and sleeping with its eyes closed, opened its eyes. "Why are you sleeping? It's such a beautiful afternoon, let's go out and play." Therefore, Little Gray jumped down from the cat tree, squatted behind Baisei's butt, and prepared to line up to go out. But who knew that Baisei would be stuck? Little Gray looked at Baisei's anxiousness as it kicked its legs and wagged its tail. It found it very interesting, so it tilted its head and looked at it for a while. Finally, Baisei was tired and wanted to rest. Little Gray jumped up, and when its fluffy big tail stopped moving, it grabbed it with its claws. Chapter 1079. Yang Yi was taking an afternoon nap upstairs. Suddenly his ears twitched slightly. Following that, a pair of sharp eyes suddenly opened. A trace of sharpness was hidden in his eyes, and it was replaced by deep doubt. He seemed to have heard a rustling sound just now. It seemed to have come from the kitchen. Even though the rooms on the second floor were soundproof, it was impossible for him to be hallucinating. Yang Yi knew that with his ability, Murphy and Shishi couldn't hear anything, but with his enhanced ears, he could still hear very subtle sounds. Moreover, Yang Yi also believed in his own judgment. Even though he had lived a peaceful life for a long time, the dangerous days of a hail of bullets were still vivid in his mind. Some reactions, or even sixth sense, were very accurate. But why was there such a big commotion? Was there a burglar in the house? Yang Yi pondered as he lifted the blanket and stood up from the bed. What's wrong now? Just now when little Sophie was taking a nap next to her, he kept kicking his legs and groaning for a while. In fact, Mo Fei had just laid down for less than 10 minutes, and now she was disturbed by his movements again. She lay on her side on the bed, squinted her eyes lazily, and muttered with her mouth pouted. It's nothing. Go back to sleep. Yang Yi smiled and comforted Murphy. He opened the door and walked out. What Yang Yi didn't expect was that when he went down the stairs, Steamed Bun was anxiously jumping up, and they just happened to meet at the corner. Steamed Bun was overjoyed. He snorted and ran around Yang Yi's feet. Because this was a staircase, he still had to go up and down. Yang Yi was a little confused. What are you doing? Did you hear a noise? Yang Yi rubbed Steamed Bun's head and asked with a smile. Steamed Bun bit Yang Yi's sleeve. He wagged his tail vigorously and tried to pull Yang Yi down. Okay, I'll go with you. Yang Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He knocked on Steamed Bun's head, making it loosen its mouth. Then he followed it to the door downstairs. Yang Yi immediately understood what was going on when he saw a white, fluffy but stuck in the dog hole. He laughed out loud in a very unkind manner. Steamed Bun was a little anxious. He looked up at his master and jumped on the ground. Then he stood up and placed his 2 front paws on his master's body. Bai was also quite pitiful. Hearing the movement behind him, he kicked his legs with lingering fear, but it was futile. His every move made people feel sad. All right, don't worry, I'll get it out. Yang Yi smiled and unlocked the door. He pushed open the door that wasn't locked by Bai. This time, Yang Yi saw Bai in a sorry state. Bai, who was originally smiling like an angel, was now listless. His aggrieved eyes also gave people a feeling of listlessness. You guys broke the dog door just to go out and play. Yang Yi looked at the dog door cover that was removed, and then looked at the claw marks on the door outside. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows and ask in surprise. Steamed Bun seemed to have realized that he had done something wrong. He lowered his head, and didn't dare to look directly at Yang Yi. He only dared to circle around Yang Yi's feet like a spoiled child. Then he reached out his claws and scratched on Yang Yi's trousers. This little guy seemed to be saying, forget it. Yang Yi only smiled and didn't pursue the matter. He squatted down, rubbed Steamed Bun and Bai's heads and said in a bad mood, You guys, I told you to play obediently downstairs. Now I have to get someone to repaint it. Although he was reprimanding them, Yang Yi still reached out and helped Bai out. It was convenient to have hands. Yang Yi pushed Bai's stuck leg inside. After pushing out the leg muscles, Bai's body loosened a little. He felt it himself and happily pulled his body out. After being stuck for a while, Bai's body wasn't used to it. He struggled on the ground for a while before he found the feeling of standing up. He was finally saved. Bai was wild with joy. He used his soft head to rub Yang Yi's chest as he squatted down. After all, he was his savior. However, Yang Yi was a little absent-minded. He was still frowning, as if he was thinking about something. What was that strange noise from the kitchen? The claw marks on the door definitely didn't come from Bye-Bye. He was stuck before he could reach out. Since Steamed Bun caught him outside. Bye-Bye was stuck outside for so long. How did Steamed Bun get in? In the afternoon, Shishi woke up naturally. However, the little girl didn't want to stay in bed because she missed Xiaoya, who was temporarily staying at Lan Xian's house. She obediently got out of bed and went to the bathroom to wash her face and change her clothes. Papa, I want to go to Xian Air's house to play. Shishi found that her father wasn't in the bedroom next door. She ran downstairs and found her father in the kitchen. She was very happy to speak. However, she quickly blinked her eyes in confusion. She saw that her father wasn't cooking in the kitchen. Instead, he was squatting on the floor and cleaning up some broken porcelain pieces. Don't come in. I haven't cleaned it up yet. Be careful not to prick your feet. Yang Yi hurriedly reminded Shishi, who hadn't walked in yet. Shishi looked at her father strangely. She simply hugged her knees and squatted at the door, as if she was also working with her father. She asked curiously, Papa, why? Why are these plates broken? Yang Yi shook his head gently and said with a wry smile, You have to ask Steamed Bun about this. He did it. Yes, the strange noise Yang Yi heard upstairs was the sound of these plates breaking. Steamed Bun couldn't come in through the door, so he found a way and jumped in through the open kitchen windowsill. Fortunately, although Steamed Bun broke the porcelain plates, he was more sensitive and didn't step on the broken porcelain pieces. He didn't hurt himself. Yang Yi only slightly blamed Steamed Bun for his recklessness and didn't care too much. If the plates were broken, they could just buy more. If Steamed Bun was hurt, Yang Yi would be worried and upset. Although Yang Yi and Shishi would sometimes blame Steamed Bun for some of his mistakes and even make him the scapegoat, no matter what, they still loved Steamed Bun. There was also Little Guai, Little Gray, and Dondo. They were all family. How many happy memories did they have with each other? Not to mention, Steamed Bun also accompanied Tong Tong as he grew up. How could Yang Yi bear to let Steamed Bun get hurt? Although the villa was in a mess, Yang Yi still opened the door and let Steamed Bun and Whitey play in the grass in the yard. Time rewound to the time before the strange noise in the kitchen. Whitey was stuck at the door for a while. Steamed Bun could only anxiously walk in circles in front of the door. He didn't know how to enter the house and ask his master for help. However, after Little Gray got tired of playing with Whitey's tail, Steamed Bun pricked up his ears and turned his head to follow Little Gray's position in the house. His ears were very sensitive. Soon after, he heard the sound of Little Gray jumping down from the kitchen windowsill. Not long after, Little Gray walked past Steamed Bun and Whitey with his elegant cat steps. He didn't even turn around to look at Steamed Bun and Whitey, who looked a little sad. No, Whitey didn't have any balls. It was just Whitey's sadness. Steamed Bun looked at Little Gray with shining eyes. He now had a way to enter the house. Chapter 1080. Little you, or let me tell you. You don't even know what Xiaoya went through at our house over the weekend. On Monday, Shishi returned to school with Xiaoya, who was safe and sound. She placed Xiaoya's birdcage on the table at the back of the classroom and filled her sink with fresh water before excitedly returning to her seat. With one leg propped up and the other bent on the chair, she couldn't wait to tell Lu Xiaoyu. The little girl felt that it was already very difficult for her to send Xiaoya back safely. So after letting go of the heavy burden in her heart, she became in high spirits. Lu Xiaoyu's reaction was a little slow. She seemed to be in a daze for 2 seconds before she looked at Shishi in confusion and asked, What did you go through? Perhaps it was because she had more fun on the weekends and was used to sleeping in, and she had to wake up early for school this morning, but every time Lu Xiaoyu came back on Monday, she looked like an office worker. She was listless and had a listless expression on her face. However, Shishi's work and rest had always been very regular, regardless of whether it was the weekend or on weekdays, so she was still in high spirits. She beamed with joy as she told Lu Xiaoyu, That's right, Xian Air and I just brought Xiaoya home. And then our family's dog, Steamed Bun. Do you still remember? Lu Xiaoyu quite liked Steamed Bun, but it was a pity that her family didn't raise a dog for her. However, at the mention of Steamed Bun, Lu Xiaoyu's interest was piqued. She nodded repeatedly. That's right, steamed bun. He ran over and wanted to see Xiaoya, but Xian and I were both scared by steamed bun. We were afraid that steamed bun would scare Xiaoya. Even though Xishi's speech was very nimble, her thoughts always moved faster than her mouth. Thus, while she was still talking about steamed bun, she immediately changed the topic and giggled. Hey, right little you, or let me tell you. My papa said that Xiaoya has been fed by us until she's fat, so she can't be like this. If I get any fatter, I won't be able to fly anymore. Hehehehe. Lu Xiaoyu was not easily amused. She found Xishi's words very amusing, so she also laughed. This further encouraged Xishi's desire to talk. Thus, the young lady started from Xiaoya's exploration in the bushes, and then talked about Xiaoya's danger in her room. Fortunately, she appeared like a divine soldier from the heavens, and rescued Xiaoya from Xiaoya's bloody mouth. He didn't know if it was because she had heard too many stories from her father, and was influenced by him, or if it was because Sisi had grown up over the years and had become more eloquent. The little girl's stories were very exciting, with all kinds of twists and turns and all kinds of ups and downs. Gradually, not only was Lu Xiaoyu listening, Xishi and Lu Xiaoyu's seats, the two boys in front of them, also turned their heads to listen. Behind them, Chen Yuxuan was propped up on someone else's table, his eyes wide open as he listened with a face full of surprise. His expression was the most varied, but when he heard that Xiaoya was in danger, Chen Yuxuan showed a terrified expression. When he heard that Xiaoya was saved, and that she was lucky enough to escape the calamity caused by steamed bun and Whitey causing havoc in the heavenly palace, at least from Xishi's point of view, the young lady would not have thought of the cause and effect behind this. Chen Yuxuan's face was full of joy. It could be said that he was very supportive. Unfortunately, Xishi did not know that he was eavesdropping. She was only happily telling Lu Xiaoyu the story of the weekend. However, Xishi's happy time was quickly coming to an end. Teacher Li Rulan walked in, and called the group of little monkeys to quickly return to their seats. Take out your textbooks and read the 7th lesson, Little Pine Tree and Big Pine Tree this morning. Do you still remember that the teacher asked you to memorize this lesson last weekend? There will be a spot check in class later, so hurry up and revise now. The teacher's arrival disbanded Xishi's story club, but the little girl still wanted to continue. She took out her textbook and whispered to Lu Xiaoyu in a low voice, Little fishy, there's still one more thing that I haven't told you. I'll tell you after class. Lu Xiaoyu seemed a little absent-minded. She took out her textbook in a panic and nervously muttered, It's over. Xishi, I forgot to memorize the lesson. You have to help me pray that the teacher doesn't pick me to memorize the lesson. Xishi did not have time to comfort Lu Xiaoyu, because the language representative was already reading the lesson loudly. Xishi and Lu Xiaoyu hurriedly followed suit. There's a little pine tree on the mountain, and a big pine tree at the foot of the mountain. The little pine tree said to the big pine tree, Hey friend, look how tall I am. I can see very, very far. What about you? The big pine tree did not answer. Xishi liked this lesson very much. Moreover, after the reading class last Friday, Xishi and Lan Xian also listened to Yu Xiaowei's demonstration of this lesson. Sister Xiaowei read it with great emotion. Uncle Feng touched the little pine tree's head and said, Child, the pine tree at the foot of the mountain is much taller than you. You can see very far because Grandpa Dashan lifted you up. When the little pine tree heard this, he lowered his head in shame. This time, when Sisi was reading this text, she couldn't help but imitate Sister Xiaowei. She read Uncle Feng's words out loud with full emotion. Especially when she read the words Grandpa Dashan and lifted up, she read it very hard. Her tone was deep and emotional, but a little too hard. After all, Xishi had not systematically learned how to read aloud elegantly. Her earnest and emotional look was very cute. Li Rulan happened to pass by Xishi. When she saw this scene, she could not help but smile. Xishi did not know the teacher's true thoughts. She felt that when the teacher passed by, she was sitting upright and still, trying hard to perform. Now that she caught a glimpse of the teacher's smile, the little girl thought that the teacher was praising her. Suddenly, she felt a sense of accomplishment, and worked even harder to read the rest of the lesson. After Li Rulin patrolled the class for 2 weeks, she returned to the podium. She still had to stay behind to supervise the morning reading class. After all, these first-grade children's self-control was still a little weak. If she or the other teachers in charge of the morning reading class were not watching, some of them might quietly slack off and not study. Standing on the podium, she could still serve as a deterrent. It was the same reason that an examiner had to sit in front of the examination room during an exam. Of course, in order not to waste time, Li Rulin opened the children's diaries that the subject representative had helped her collect in the morning, and began to correct the children's diaries. After the last spring outing, Li Rulin had started to teach the students to write diaries. The children had complained a lot, but they had gradually gotten used to it recently. Of course, Li Rulin still knew a thing or two about the children's abilities. She did not set any thresholds for their diaries. Some children would write more, such as Xixi and Chao Rulin, who were serious students. Some children would write less, such as Chen Yuxuan and the other children who did not like to study. 1 or 2 sentences would become a diary entry, but Li Rulin did not blame them. Even now, Li Rulin was holding a red pen and correcting the diaries. She did not want to give marks. The so-called correction was just to see if the children had completed the diaries and give some feedback based on the content. For example, now that she had opened Chen Yuxuan's diary, there were only a few sentences in the previous Friday's diary that had not been corrected yet. "Tonight," Mom said, "Chen Yuxuan, take this garbage out." I said, "Yes." The garbage was so heavy, but I was very strong, so I took the garbage downstairs and threw it out. Chen Yuxuan's diary was already much better than before. At least, it had changed from a simple sentence, "Nothing happened today." It was so boring. Now it was 2 or 3 sentences, and it even told a short story. Therefore, Li Rulin picked up the red pen and wrote a few words of praise below. Then she wrote, "However, you still have a lot of room for improvement. For example, when you took the garbage out today, you can add some details. For example, when you took the garbage out, did the heavy feeling make you feel tired? For example, when you took the garbage downstairs, did you meet other people? For example, after you helped Mom take the garbage out, did Mom praise you?" These are all things that you can mention. Li Rulin did not pick. She read the diaries according to the order in which they were placed. Although she preferred to read Xixi's diary, there were many interesting stories in it. It could be said that reading Xixi's diary was as interesting as reading a storybook. However, after all, she still had to take care of and educate every student, regardless of whether they wrote well or poorly. Take Chen Yuxuan for example. Although his writing was not as good as Xixi's, Li Rulin still gave a lot of comments. Moreover, she also saw Chen Yuxuan's delightful improvement. After correcting the Saturday and Sunday diaries, Li Rulin put down Chen Yuxuan's diary and picked up the next one. The signature was Lan Xian. Li Rulin flipped open the diary and read it carefully. Suddenly, she frowned slightly and her expression became serious. Moreover, her eyes began to show hesitation. Chapter 1081. Lan Zhoukai had gone to Jinling City to inspect the construction progress of the amusement park, and Wu Jingjing didn't check on Lan Xian's homework often. Therefore, Lan Xian's situation hadn't been exposed yet. This weekend, Murphy was going to hold a concert in Chengdu. Therefore, on Friday afternoon, after Xixi finished school, Yang Yi took her, Lan Xian, and Tong Tong on a plane to Chengdu. Why was Lan Xian included? Because of this trip to Chengdu, Yang Yi planned to use this good opportunity to take Cici to see the pandas and try the famous delicacies of Chengdu. After hearing from Xixi that there were so many wonderful arrangements, Lan Xian ran home and went to find Papa Yang with her remaining 4 gold coins. "Papa Yang, can I use 1 gold coin to see a panda, and then use 3 gold coins to eat something delicious?" Lan Xian looked at Yang Yi expectantly with her watery eyes. Obviously, 1 gold coin wasn't enough to see pandas. At most, she could only see the pictures of pandas that Xixi brought back. And 3 gold coins wasn't enough to eat much delicious food. However, looking at Lan Xian's pitiful eyes, Yang Yi touched his conscience and finally accepted Lan Xian's 4 gold coins. He pretended that it was a promotion for the half-year anniversary of the opening of Gold Coin Mall, and gave Lan Xian a first-class plane ticket. It had to be said that the first-class cabin of a domestic flight was very different from the first-class cabin of an international flight. Yang Yi and the others were on the plane from Jiangqing to Chengdu. The first-class cabin was similar to the business-class cabin, and it was arranged in pairs with 6 seats in a row. The luxury of the seats couldn't be compared to the first-class cabin of an international flight. At a glance, it seemed similar to the economy-class cabin. At most, the gap between the seats was bigger, the seats could be reclined, and there were armrests on both sides. The small table was more spacious, and of course, there was a small sofa behind the front row for feet and luggage. It sounded quite complete, but it did look a little shabby. However, Yang Yi had been on it many times and was used to it. Moreover, Yang Yi was more concerned about the fact that there were fewer people in the first-class cabin, and it was more private. With his identity, it wouldn't be easy to cause a sensation. For the children, the luxury of the seats wasn't within their scope of concern. After Xi and Lan Xian got on the plane, they ran around excitedly. The 2 girls jostled each other as they ran to the front and couldn't stop giggling. Yang Yi and the others were the first batch of passengers to come to the first-class cabin. There was no one else around, so Yang Yi didn't care about the noise of Xi and Lan Xian. He was busy putting Tong Tong, who was in his arms, on the seat and putting the square suitcase that he carried with him on the small sofa in front. But soon new first-class passengers came up. It was an elderly couple who were dressed fashionably. They looked like they were in their 50s or 60s. The stewardess was taking their tickets and leading them to the seats at the back. Yang Yi looked up and waved his hand to Xi and Lan Xian. The 2 girls were standing in a row, looking out the window of the plane and chattering. "Don't disturb others. We are now in a public place, so you can't be as casual as you are at home. You have to speak softly, and you can't run around." Yang Yi gently rubbed the 2 girls' heads and said with a smile, "Let's make a small agreement, okay? Today on the plane, let me see who is the most obedient. Tomorrow, when we go to see the panda, I'll buy you a big ice cream, and the other one can only watch the other eat." "A big ice cream?" Cece's and Lanxin's eyes lit up at the same time. Now that the weather was hot, eating ice cream was simply the most comfortable enjoyment. Even if the weather wasn't hot, ice cream was still very attractive to children. "I'm the most obedient," Lan Xian hurriedly shouted. She stuck out her chest and looked very straight. "No, good children, you can't speak loudly." She was more direct. She pulled Lan Xian's hand and whispered. However, although the 2 girls were no longer as noisy as they were when they first boarded the plane because of the temptation of the ice cream, they were still driven by endless energy and the excitement brought about by the trip. After a while, they began to gather together and whisper to each other. Yang Yi bought 4 adjacent first-class tickets. Although Tong Tong wanted to sit with him, and it was a bit of a waste to have a ticket, Yang Yi bought 1 more just in case. Who knows, maybe Tong Tong wanted to sit alone during the flight. Therefore, these 4 seats gave Lan Xian and Xi space to play. Yang Yi sat in the middle seat so that he could take care of Tong Tong, and Xi and Lan Xian, who were sitting on the other side of the aisle. However, the 2 girls were restless. The plane flew steadily in the sky. When it was time to unfasten the seat belts, Xi and Lan Xian began to whisper to each other. No one knew what they were talking about, but they began to run excitedly from seat to seat. After a while, Xi ran to Lan Xian's seat. She giggled and sat on the small sofa in front of Lan Xian. Of course, this gap was very wide. Only adults could put their feet on it. Lan Xian and Xi could not reach it. Lan Xian jumped down from her seat and ran to Xi's small sofa. She sat side by side with Xi. Yang Yi did not understand what the 2 girls were playing. Anyway, they whispered to each other for a while. Xi sat on Lan Xian's seat again. After a while, Lan Xian jumped down from the small sofa and ran to the seat next to Yang Yi. Then, she looked for a gap between Yang Yi and Tong Tong and smiled silently at Xi. That's right. In order to appear obedient, even if they were playing, they deliberately made no sound. Little Momo, on the other hand, was teased by the two sisters who were running around. He was originally sitting obediently in his father's arms and watching the cartoon on the small screen in front of him, but now he felt that the cartoon was no longer interesting. Hey hey! The little boy groaned. He pulled away his father's big hand and slid down the seat. His feet could not reach the seat. He turned over and prepared to slide down the edge of the sofa with his bulging belly. What are you doing? Yang Yi had to hold his little hand and carry him to the ground, but he still kept a close eye on him. He was afraid that the little boy would not notice and bump his head. After all, the space in the plane was very small. Hee. Tong Tong did not answer his father. He giggled and walked down the aisle. Then he threw himself between his sister's legs. He put one hand on his sister's thigh and the other hand on the seat. Little brother, sit with me. Shishi bent down excitedly and reached out to carry Tong Tong. Actually, the word carry could not be used because they were both children. From the looks of it, Shishi's action of carrying Tong Tong looked more like she was pulling him by force, but it didn't matter. Little Momo finally climbed up and sat on the same seat as her sister. Shishi and Lan Xian could not sit together, but Tong Tong's butt was very thin. He and his sister could barely sit side by side in this small seat. After they sat down, Shishi smiled and winked at Lan Xian from across the aisle. Tong Tong looked at his sister and giggled for a while. Then he smiled at his father from across his sister, as if he was showing something to his father. I want to go over too. Lan Xian could not hold it in anymore. She muttered softly and jumped down from the seat beside Yang Yi. Then she ran over to Shishi's seat. Now the three little ones were all sitting on the other side, while Yang Yi was left alone on the other side. Chapter 1082. Although the three little guys were playing together on the plane, they didn't make too much noise, and they wouldn't go to other seats. At most, they would stay in their own little world, pointing and giggling inexplicably. Maybe it was because there weren't many first-class passengers on the plane. Yang Yi saw that the noise didn't affect others, so he just reminded them when they didn't pay attention, and their voices began to rise. Most of the time he didn't deliberately suppress their nature of playing. It took 3 hours to fly from Jiang City to Chengdu, so when the plane arrived at Chengdu, it was nearly 11 o'clock, and the night was dark. Tong Tong was tired after playing with her sisters on the plane, so she curled up in her father's arms and fell asleep early. Shishi and Lan Xian also yawned. The two girls were used to sleeping early, so they were very tired. If it weren't for the excitement of traveling, they would have fallen asleep on the plane. Come on, Shishi, Dad doesn't have so many hands to take care of. You hold Xian Air's hand. Xian Air, you have to hold Shishi's hand. You two sisters, don't let go. Yang Yi held Tong Tong in one hand and Lan Xian, and Shishi in the other hand, walking out of the passage. Behind him were 3 men in black suits, carrying bags and dragging suitcases. One was his personal assistant, and the other 2 were bodyguards. These were the standard domestic equipment that Mo Shaowan usually arranged for him. If he was in Harbor City or abroad, he might be equipped with more bodyguards. In addition, I have to mention this by the way, after returning from Harbor City this year, Mo Shaowan realized that Yang Yi's identity was different from before. No matter whether Yang Yi kept a low profile or not, he and Murphy needed some professional bodyguards to escort them when they attended activities. And they couldn't hire temporary bodyguards in a hurry like in Harbor City, right? Therefore, Mo Shaowan began to recruit a group of full-time bodyguards in the name of the Hua Yi Brothers Company. Yang Yi also went to his old comrade-in-arms and old leader, Luo Zongxing, for help. Luo Zongxing had now officially retired from Battle Wolf. He held a relatively high military position in the Southwest Military Region. Coincidentally, there were a group of retired soldiers in the Southwest Military Region this year, and the Southwest Military Region also had a headache about the problem of placement. Yang Yi's needs, so Luo Zongxing selected 10 veterans with good skills and good character for him. Although there were no retired Special Forces soldiers from Battle Wolf, they were all treasures. After retiring from Battle Wolf, they were usually hired to be instructors in the Southwest Military Region, or even other military regions. Yang Yi was an exception. These 10 people were also the best among ordinary soldiers. After special training from the instructors of the bodyguard company, they also mastered the skills and qualities that bodyguards should have. Of course, the 10 bodyguards were not all arranged for Yang Yi. In order not to waste resources, sometimes when Guizi, Yang Huan, or Qianli Chuanshu attended more complicated events, Mo Xiaowan would also arrange 1 or 2 bodyguards to follow them. In comparison, Yang Yi and Murphy used bodyguards less often because they participated in fewer public events. Then again, although Yang Yi did not like ostentation, he had so many children with him this time. He would not feel at ease if he did not bring a few people with him. Moreover, now that the whole country knew about his net worth, it was necessary to bring some bodyguards with him when he went to other cities. After all, no matter how good Yang Yi's skills were, he was only good at himself. There would always be things that were inconvenient for him to take action, or things that he could not take care of. As soon as he stepped out of the terminal, he saw a large group of fans and reporters surrounding him. The 2 bodyguards reacted quickly. They just glanced at each other and skillfully handed the push-pull suitcases to their assistants. They spread out their arms to protect Yang Yi and the 3 children. Although he did not know that his whereabouts were exposed so quickly, Yang Yi was fine. He was used to these situations. He paused for a moment and let go of Lan Xian's hand to wave at the fans and reporters. Thank you, everyone, for welcoming me so warmly. Chengdu is a very beautiful and friendly city. After Yang Yi put down his hand, he did not hold Lan Xian's little hand. Instead, he pulled Xixi and Lan Xian to his side and said loudly, "However, I'm sorry that I can't interact with everyone tonight, nor can I accept any interviews from the reporters. As you can see, it's very late and the children are very sleepy. I'm really sorry." After that, Yang Yi smiled and nodded to the crowd. Then, under the protection of his bodyguards and assistants, he walked out of the airport and got into the car that was going to pick them up. Most of Yang Yi's fans were more rational. After listening to Yang Yi's gentle explanation, they stopped in their tracks. However, there were still some fans who desperately tried to squeeze in. There were also many reporters who did not care about what they said at all. Some of them held their cameras and hurriedly followed, pressing the shutter crazily. Some of them shook their microphones and shouted their own questions, wanting to interview Yang Yi. Fortunately, Yang Yi's 2 bodyguards were very helpful. Although the 2 of them looked a little weak, with the help of the airport security, they still protected Yang Yi and the others and made it not too crowded. It was not until the black nanny van slowly drove out of the airport and onto the road that the crowded crowd gradually disappeared from Lan Xian's sight. It was the first time that she had encountered such a big crowd, so she was very nervous. Not to mention that she had been holding on to Yang Yi's trouser legs tightly just now. Lan Xian had been leaning on the window to look back after getting into the car. "Papa Yang, why are there so many people?" Lan Xian asked with some lingering fear. Because. Such a simple question, Yang Yi found himself stuck. How should he answer? Should he say that he was too famous? That he was a big star? At this time, Xixi interrupted her father's words. The little girl first yawned, then a little lazily muttered to Lan Xian, "Oh, it's all like this. Because many people know my papa, so when they see my papa and mom, they will call their names." Can too famous be explained in this way? Yang Yi looked at Xixi with interest and nodded with a smile. Then I don't want to know so many people. It's too troublesome. Lan Xian shook her head hard and said. After Lan Xian finished speaking, she couldn't support her tired body anymore. She fell to the side and leaned on Xixi's body. "Oh, Xian, you are too heavy." Although Xixi was very sleepy, she could not help but protest loudly. Although Yang Yi left the airport, the photos of him with the 3 children were still on many reporters' cameras. There was nothing strange about Xixi and Tong Tong, but the reporters were very curious about who the little girl standing next to Xixi was. Could it be that Yang Yi and Murphy had a 3rd child? No, this child was much older than Tong Tong. If it was Yang Yi and Murphy's child, then it should be the 2nd child, and Tong Tong should be the 3rd child. But it was impossible. Xixi and Tong Tong looked a little like Yang Yi and Murphy, and Lan Xian. Although she was also a pretty little girl, Judging from her body shape, they should not be a family. So the question was, who was this little girl that they could not ask at the airport? Why was she next to Yang Yi and received such considerate care from Yang Yi? Chapter 1083. When Yang Yi got back to the hotel last night, it was already very late. When he woke up early this morning, he realized that the two girls were still sleeping like pigs. Interestingly, because Shi and Lan Xian were sleeping on the same big bed. Their sleeping positions were Lan Xian hugging the quilt, and Shi sleeping directly on the other side of the quilt. One of her legs was even placed on Lan Xian's chubby little butt. Perhaps it was because her feet felt better. After Yang Yi got up, he pulled Shishi's leg down and pulled the quilt over her. As for Lan Xian, he pushed the little girl away as if he was pushing a piece of wood. He let her change back to her normal sleeping position, and then covered them with the quilt. They arrived at the hotel very late last night, so the three children did not take a shower. Lan Xian and Shishi were at least asked by Yang Yi to go to the bathroom to get a towel to wipe their faces and arms. After that, they washed their faces and brushed their teeth before going to bed. Tong Tong slept directly until the next morning. But no matter what, it was a little unhygienic to not take a shower. Therefore, Yang Yi grabbed Tong Tong, who had woken up early and had been kicking his legs and playing with his feet. He raised the little guy with both hands and giggled because he found it very interesting. Yang Yi went to the bathroom to take a shower. As for Shi and Lan Xian, it was not their turn yet, so Yang Yi let them sleep a little longer. Mo Fei also couldn't get up, she was still sleeping. In fact, Murphy did not sleep well last night. She was already very tired from the rehearsal. In the hotel, she had to force herself to keep her eyelids open and wait for Yang Yi and the others to come to help take care of the two little girls. She had to toss and turn until very late last night. Just now, Tong Tong had woken her up. Yang Yi felt sorry for his wife, so he took Tong Tong to take a shower and let Murphy sleep a little longer. After an unknown amount of time, Shi, who was in her sleep, felt that the world was falling apart, especially when there was a tremor right in front of her face. The little girl was so scared that she immediately woke up from her sleep. Hee. Little Momo's complacent laughter drifted into her ears, causing Cece, whose mind was a little muddled, to gradually come back to her senses. She struggled to raise her fluffy and messy little head, squinting her sleepy eyes as she glanced at little Momo, who was propping herself up with both hands. She pouted her little mouth and let out a long groan. She was like a little pig, not awake at all. Of course, this snort also seemed to be a protest. Little brother, why did you disturb your sister's sleep? Tong Tong, on the other hand, was immersed in his joy. He chuckled and wanted to share it with his sister. Xiang, sister. Tong Tong stretched out his little arm towards his sister's nose and said with a smile of exultation. He had just taken a shower, so he was only wearing a pair of shorts and a small t-shirt. Naturally, a large part of his arm was exposed. His father was rummaging through his luggage to find diapers for him to wear, as he still had to take off his pants later. However, Tong Tong, who was being carried to his sister's big bed by his father, was restless. His sister was still sleeping, so he could not wait to wake her up. She was still unhappy when she was woken up. When she heard her brother showing off, she muttered with a slightly nasal voice, "It doesn't smell good. It smells bad." Tong Tong widened his eyes in surprise. He had unwavering trust in his sister, so when he heard her say that it smells bad, he quickly retracted his hand and tried to smell it himself. It doesn't smell bad. Therefore, he stretched out his hand again and said seriously, No, it doesn't smell bad. It smells good." Yang Yi walked over with a pair of diapers. When he saw this scene, he could not help but laugh. He rubbed Shishi's little head and said, "All right, sister, hurry up and get up. While you're at it, wake up Xianer as well. You two go to the bathroom to take a shower. After that, we'll go eat delicious food and see the pandas." When Shishi heard that they were going to see the pandas, she quickly woke up from her state of lazing around in bed. She hugged the quilt and sat up. She squinted her eyes, which were still unable to open, and combed her messy hair with her claws. Lan Xian was still sleeping next to her. Perhaps she was dreaming about the delicious food that Yang Yi mentioned just now. She smacked her lips. Papa, where's Xiang Xiang? Tong Tong was still immersed in the topic that he had just discussed with his sister. Although he was pressed down on the bed by his father to put on a diaper, he still tried to raise his little arm and pouted his little mouth to let his father smell it. Yes, you smell good. Sister was wrong. She's the stinky one. She didn't take a shower last night either, Yang Yi said with a smile. When Shishi heard this, she immediately became unhappy. She got up from the bed and leaned over to hug her father's shoulders. Her soft little body pressed against her father's arm. She shook her little butt unhappily and shouted, "That's not the case. Little brother is the stinky one." See, she became energetic after messing around for a while. Although Yang especially got up early, it was already past 9 o'clock when he left the house after taking care of the 3 children in turn. Murphy didn't go out with him. Tonight's concert would be held at 11 o'clock. She still had to go to the concert venue to practice with the invited singers. Yang Yi didn't need to rehearse. He only needed to sing one song in Chengdu. When they met in the stadium in the afternoon, he just needed to do a sound check. Remember to eat breakfast. I'll take them out to play. Before Yang Yi went out, he ordered the hotel's breakfast to be served and placed on the table. He reminded Murphy, who still wanted to stay in bed for a while. Murphy hugged the quilt in the same position as Lan Xian just now. However, her white long legs were exposed, which made her more charming. Hearing Yang Yi's nagging, she raised her head. Her beautiful eyes revealed a trace of happiness and she sweetly said, "Okay. We're going to eat delicious food." Lan Xian shouted. In the elevator downstairs, Shishi and Lan Xian started a fierce discussion about the purpose of today's visit. "No, we're going to see the pandas. My papa said yesterday." Shishi shook her head. "But he also said that we're going to eat delicious food." Lan Xian said unhappily. If we don't eat delicious food, how can we? I haven't eaten breakfast. I'm starving." How could they have the strength to see the pandas without delicious food? Shishi blinked her eyes and said with some confusion, But we don't have much time. Papa said that we're going to Mom's concert in the afternoon." Yang Yi saw that their discussion had fallen into a misunderstanding, so he said with a smile, "We're going to eat delicious food first, then see the pandas. Don't worry, there are 2 good restaurants in front of the hotel. Let's try the famous delicacies in Chengdu and fill our stomachs. Then we'll take the bus to the place where the pandas are." "See, I told you there would be delicious food." Lan Xian was overjoyed. She said to Shishi proudly, "Because we haven't eaten breakfast. It's just that your mother didn't eat delicious food. She wants to eat in the hotel. The hotel's breakfast is not delicious." "All right, but I want to see the giant panda as soon as possible. Brother too. Brother, do you want to see the super cute giant panda?" Sisi turned her head and looked for her ally in her father's arms. Tong Tong opened his round eyes and looked at his sister. He found that his sister was talking to him, so he immediately laughed happily. "Pandas." She emphasized this word in front of her brother. Her big eyes were full of expectation, and she wanted her brother to repeat it. Tong Tong thought that his sister was talking about Xiao Guai. They were all cats, so why did she have to make it so complicated? He clapped his hands excitedly and shouted, "Meow meow." "Hey, it's not meow. It's not a cat, it's a panda. A panda is very big." She cried anxiously. Chapter 1084. The food in Chengdu cannot be separated from the word spicy. However, not all of them were spicy. For example, Yang Yi had to sing tonight, so he couldn't eat anything that would irritate his throat. Therefore, he brought the children to this century-old shop that sold tofu pudding. After leaving the hotel, they still encountered the problem of being surrounded by fans. The enthusiasm of the fans in Chengdu was beyond Yang Yi's expectations. Perhaps it had something to do with the fact that there were not many concerts scheduled in the southwest region. Many fans had come from other places, or even other provinces. Luckily, Yang Yi had the experience of last night. Today, he asked Mo Xiaowan to arrange a few more bodyguards for him to protect him all the way to the tofu pudding shop. There's a private room upstairs. Be quiet. The owner of the tofu pudding shop was very considerate. When he saw the celebrities bringing their children over, he knew that this was a living advertisement. He immediately extended his hand to invite them upstairs and vacated the tea room that he usually used to entertain his friends. One must know that this time-honored tofu pudding shop couldn't be considered luxurious. It was basically a hall. The so-called private room was just a small room upstairs. However, this wasn't bad. At least it was clean and tidy. The tea set had been moved away by the owner. What do you want to eat? Yang Yi took the menu and smiled as he asked Shishi and Lan Xian to look at it together. The two little girls, one on each side of Yang Yi, held onto Yang Yi's arm and stared at the menu. It has to have a lot of meat. Lan Xian muttered as she looked at the menu. But it doesn't seem like there's any meat. There's meat. There's beef tofu pudding here. Shishi's eyes were very sharp. She stretched out her slender arm and pointed at a line of words on the menu. Then she turned her head and said to Lan Xian, "That's right. Beef tofu pudding." When Lan Xian saw the word beef, her eyes lit up. She excitedly said, "Daddy Yang, I want beef tofu pudding." "You want beef tofu pudding?" Yang Yi looked at the small chili symbol at the back of the menu. He smiled and said, "This is spicy. Can you eat spicy beef tofu pudding?" "Spicy?" Lan Xian's response was a little slow. At this moment, her little head was filled with the word beef. How could she care about anything else? Anyway, she just had a confused look on her face. On the contrary, Shishi reacted faster. She quickly grabbed her father's arm, shook her head, and said, "No, don't eat spicy food." She seemed to dislike this shop when she heard that there was spicy food. Indeed, Shishi didn't like spicy food when she was young, but Yang Yi was still going to let her practice. He might forget about it today, but he had to try spicy food tomorrow no matter what. He had grown up and should improve his tolerance. He had to try all kinds of sour, sweet, bitter, and spicy food. Otherwise, wouldn't he miss out on a lot of delicacies in the world? The boss was standing at the side with a small booklet. When he heard Shishi's words, he hurriedly explained, Yes, we have non-spicy tofu pudding. For example, this brown sugar tofu pudding and this ice-drunk tofu pudding can be made non-spicy. Also, our signature Earbook is also filled with meat, and it's not spicy. This kid should like it." Lan Xian hurriedly nodded her head. "Ice-drunk tofu pudding? It's filled with alcohol? Kids can't eat it, right?" Yang Yi lightly raised his eyebrows and asked. "It's not filled with alcohol, but with mash. It won't make people drunk." The boss hurriedly explained. However, he looked at the three kids and hesitated for a moment before saying, "But if you have concerns, it's fine if you don't let the kids eat it. After all, there's still some alcohol in it. You can order the brown sugar tofu pudding." The boss looked at Yang Yi anxiously as he explained. He was worried that Yang Yi would be unhappy after looking at the menu and leave. "Can you put less chili in the beef tofu pudding? Or can you make it non-spicy?" Yang Yi asked. Customers who came to Chengdu to look for non-spicy food were usually looking for trouble. In Chengdu, or even the entire Sichuan province, which restaurant didn't serve spicy food, this shop even provided non-spicy tofu pudding, which was rare. If it was any other customer, they would probably be despised. But facing Yang Yi, the boss could only carefully explain. "This is more difficult because our beef is specially marinated, so it's spicy." "Okay then, give me 1 serving of ice-drunk tofu pudding, 3 servings of brown sugar tofu pudding, and 2 servings of the one with meat filling." Yang Yi didn't mind and said, "Daddy Yi." The boss helped to add, "Yes." Yang Yi smiled and nodded his head. "I'll start with these. Also beef tofu pudding." Lan Xian, who was listening attentively at the side, immediately shouted, "How could they leave out the beef? This is spicy." Yang Yi smiled and looked at Lan Xian. She also chimed in, "Yes, spicy food doesn't taste good. I want to eat. Lan Xian pulled Yang Yi's arm and looked at Yang Yi with her pleading eyes. "All right, add another serving of beef tofu pudding. The rest are the same." I don't think she can eat this beef tofu pudding. Yang Yi smiled and said to the boss. After ordering the dishes, Yang Yi asked Shishi to help take care of the tong tong. He walked out of the private room with the boss and called for the bodyguard sitting on the second floor to order something to eat. Then Yang Yi called for a bodyguard and asked him to go to the shop next door to buy a few servings of baked egg cakes for him. It's probably going to be hard for us to go out now. Later, arrange for a car to come over. After eating, we'll go straight to the giant panda base. Yang Yi took out his wallet, took out a few red bills and said to him, "Also this baked egg cake, if you like it, you can buy more." The tofu pudding shop served the dishes very quickly. After a while, bowls of tofu pudding were brought in. The big white porcelain bowls were filled with white tofu pudding. The brown sugar tofu pudding was a brown sugar juice that looked like soy sauce. Yang Yi's ice-drunk tofu pudding was much lighter. It was a clear white soup that looked like ordinary tofu pudding. There were clear grains of glutinous rice floating in it, and 2 red goji berries. Obviously, this ice-drunk tofu pudding was much better looking. Cici and Lan Xian both liked its appearance very much. They pulled their stools over and began to watch it while making a big fuss. Tong Tong was also attracted by their movements. He hurriedly came over and tried to squeeze between his father's legs. He said, asking his father to pick him up and look at it. "You can't eat this. It tastes a little like alcohol." Yang Yi smiled. "Papa can't eat it or drink it either." She seriously protested when she heard that. Perhaps it was because Murphy had repeatedly mentioned that she was disgusted with smoking and drinking. She had hated smoking since she was young, and she started to resist drinking because of that incident in the past. She had been influenced by what she saw and heard, so she also had a deep-rooted dislike for these two things. She felt that these were not good things from the bottom of her heart. "This isn't alcohol. It just tastes a little like alcohol." Yang Yi explained. "You can't eat it, you can't eat it." Shishi's delicate brows furrowed. She pouted her small mouth and shook her head vigorously. "Papa, I don't want you to drink. I'll be very sad." When the little girl said this, her expression was very serious. Moreover, there was a hint of indescribable sadness in her tone. It seemed that if her father really ate it, she would be very disappointed and really sad. Yang Yi reluctantly looked at the ice-drunk tofu pudding, which was still emitting a bit of white cold air, and sighed. He pushed it to the side and said, "Okay, then I won't eat this." The little girl's delicate little face immediately revealed a happy expression. She happily said, Papa, I'll eat my brown sugar tofu pudding with you. I'll share it with you." She had counted before. The tofu pudding on the table was actually 1 serving per person. Yang Yi couldn't help but laugh. He was somewhat moved and said, "It's okay. Your little brother definitely can't finish a bowl of tofu pudding. Moreover, we have a lot of other things to eat later. If it's still not enough, Papa can order more. Then little brother and I will share some for Papa," she said enthusiastically. At the side, Lan Xian seemed to be a little taciturn. In fact, that wasn't the case. She couldn't be bothered to listen to the conversation between Shishi and Yang Yi. She didn't even care if she could eat the ice-drunk tofu pudding. Her eyes were fixed on the waiter, who had just pushed the door open. A big bowl of tofu pudding covered with large pieces of beef was being served. This was definitely added because Yang Yi's face was brushed on it. Although there was still a daunting red soup and red chili floating on top of it, a thick meaty aroma was already wafting out. Although the spicy aroma was very strong, this spicy aroma was able to stimulate one's appetite before one ate it. The thick and stimulating meaty aroma was like an invisible hand that grabbed onto Lan Xian's stomach. The little girl swallowed her saliva. Her round eyes shone brightly. It was as if there was an explosive rock background music playing. Nothing can stop your yearning for beef. Chapter 1085. Excluding the ice-drunk tofu pudding and the other tofu pudding that Yang Yi didn't order because of its spiciness, there really wasn't anything special about the tofu pudding made with brown sugar. After all, there wasn't much difference between tofu pudding and tofu pudding. Although they weren't the same type of food, There was only a slight difference in the degree of solidification, and the texture was slightly smoother. The so-called brown sugar tofu pudding wasn't much different from tofu pudding with sugar water. She had this question in her mind. She scooped up a spoonful of the tofu pudding and tasted it. Then she looked at her father in confusion and asked, "Hey Daddy, isn't this tofu pudding? We've eaten it before." However, little mommy liked it very much. Perhaps it was because it was sweet and tasted good, but after eating a small spoonful, his eyes narrowed in joy. His two little hands waved a little, and then he asked his father to give him another spoonful. Lon Xian was competing with the plate of beef tofu pudding. The little girl raised her chopsticks and wanted to eat to her heart's content. She who was beside her, grabbed her hand in panic and shouted, "Xian, no, it's super spicy." She looked as if she had seen poison. She pointed at the chili oil floating on the surface of the beef tofu pudding and shouted, "Xian, look, it's all spicy. Chili, chili, chili. It's all chili. It's very, very spicy." Lon Xian was a little hesitant. She pouted and looked at it for a while. Then she twisted in her seat and said with a little hesitation, But I want to eat the beef." "But it's very spicy." She pressed her little hands on her knees and looked at Lon Xian worriedly. "But I want to eat beef." The two little girls both had their own insistence. Lon Xian repeated the same thing over and over again. "If you want to eat it, then try it. If you don't try it, how will you know if you can handle it?" Yang Yi stood at the side, holding a bowl, and smiled at them. Also, there are some good things that are not so easy to obtain. If you want to obtain them, you have to overcome some difficulties. While Yang Yi was talking, Tong Tong, who was sitting on the chair next to him, was getting impatient. He reached out his little hand and grabbed his father's wrist. Not to mention the Tong Tong, Lon Xian sniffled as if she had smelled the scent again. She finally made up her mind. "I'll give it a try." She couldn't stop her. She sat at the side and looked at her little friend worriedly. Lon Xian picked up a slice of beef with her chopsticks. She knew how to eat very well. She picked up the beef and tossed the other chopped onions, ginger, pepper and other ingredients to the side. Then, she directly stuffed the thinly sliced beef into her mouth. The beef was very chewy, and it tasted especially good in the mouth. Lon Xian craved this taste. Once she chewed, she felt as if her whole body had been sublimated. Her eyes narrowed comfortably. It seemed to be delicious. She blinked. She was so focused on Lon Xian that she even forgot to eat her own tofu pudding. Spicy beef. The first word to describe it was fragrant. Lon Xian first felt that she was eating very well. Then, the spiciness came up to her like an assassin in the dark. Lon Xian's eyes, which were originally squinting comfortably, wrinkled up as if she had been bitten by a bug. It wasn't that both of her eyes were wrinkled. Her eyes were wrinkled more on one side, and the other side was different. It was a little asymmetrical. Spicy. Lon Xian couldn't stand the spiciness. She jumped down from the chair and jumped on the ground. But she didn't scream. They hissed and gasped for cold air, and then hopped around noiselessly, because she was still chewing the beef in her mouth. It was indeed spicy, but the taste was actually quite good. Lon Xian chewed and felt that with every bite, the rich flavor of the beef would surge out. How could she bear to spit it out? Yang Yi poured a glass of iced orange juice for Lon Xian. After Lon Xian ate the beef, she drank a few mouthfuls of orange juice to barely relieve the spiciness. But after the commotion just now, the little girl's face was red from the spiciness, and her forehead was sweating. "Is it very spicy?" She asked with concern. Lon Xian nodded. "Sai, I told you not to eat it," she said. Lon Xian recovered and regained her spirit. Her eyes were watery. She didn't know if it was because of the spiciness, but she looked very lively. She giggled and said, "But it's also very delicious." "But you were about to cry from the spiciness." She didn't believe her. "It's really delicious. The spiciness is also very delicious." Lon Xian didn't know if she was trying to be brave or really felt that way. She anxiously jumped in front of Shi and shouted. Actually, it was quite uncomfortable to be hit by the spiciness just now. Lon Xian didn't dare to continue eating the beef. Instead, She turned her head and drank her brown sugar tofu pudding. However, after eating the brown sugar tofu pudding and tasting the Earbook with meat filling, Lan Xian still couldn't forget about the beef. She bit the Earbook with non-spicy Earbook, but her eyes were fixed on the big piece of beef. How could the pork taste as good as the beef? Finally, under the stimulation of her appetite, Lan Xian gathered her courage and reached for the bowl of beef tofu pudding for the second time. This was a scene that Yang Yi and Shishi didn't notice. That was because Shishi felt that the tofu pudding didn't taste good. She was eating the Earbook with one hand and pushing the bowl of tofu pudding to her father with the other hand, so that he could eat it. It wasn't until Lan Xian shouted that it was spicy and drank the orange juice that Yang Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at this gluttonous little girl. Just give it a try. If you don't like the spiciness, don't force yourself. Yang Yi comforted. However, when Lan Xian turned her head around, she didn't have an uncomfortable expression. She licked her red lips and said to Yang Yi with a serious expression, "No, it's really delicious." With the second piece of beef, there was a third piece, a fourth piece. Lan Xian seemed to have a better tolerance for spiciness. Although she was still gritting her teeth and sweating profusely from eating, Yang Yi saw that her eyes were very clear, and that her excitement didn't diminish. Shishi, the beef is super delicious. Lan Xian didn't only eat by herself, but also chewed as she strongly recommended it to Shishi. But it's spicy. When Sisi saw Lan Xian eating so happily, she actually wavered a little and said hesitantly, "It's fine. It's not spicy anymore. Shishi, let me tell you, you can drink this ice juice. It's super delicious, and then it won't be spicy anymore." Lan Xian said with a smile of exultation. Perhaps sometimes, the advice and encouragement of peers is more effective than the persuasion of parents. Sometimes it's a positive effect, and sometimes it's a negative effect. Let's look at the positive side here. Therefore, although Shishi was afraid of spicy food before, when she saw how excited Lan Xian was, her originally firm heart wavered again. Why don't you do the same as Xian and try it first? Yang Yi saw this and said encouragingly, "Maybe now that you've grown up, you'll feel differently about spiciness." When Lan Xian heard that Shishi was going to try her beef, she was a little unhappy. However, when she thought that it was Shishi, and that there was still a lot of beef left in the bowl, and that she was a little full from drinking the orange juice, she finally felt at ease. "Okay, Shishi, you try it too." After Lan Xian thought it through, she generously pushed the bowl over. With the encouragement of her father and friends, Shishi finally plucked up the courage to pick up her chopsticks. Tong Tong looked at his sister in surprise. He seemed to be able to hear the difficulty of this challenge. Although he was full and had no appetite, the little guy still stared at his sister with his big eyes as she picked up the beef. From Tong Tong's perspective, his sister hesitated for a long time before biting the beef between her teeth. However, her reaction was different from Lan Xian's. After a few bites, she felt the rising tide of spiciness. She frowned and spat it out. "It's so spicy, so spicy." Shishi frowned as she drank the orange juice and breathed in through her small mouth that was numb from the spiciness. "Oh, you can't spit it out." Lan Xian felt that it was a waste. "Don't you think it's delicious?" With the ice drink, Shishi felt better after a while. She nodded gently, pouted her small mouth and said, "It's delicious, but it's spicy. I don't think it's as delicious as my papa's." Yang Yi saw Shishi's improvement. He rolled his eyes and saw that she had poured half a cup of cold water into a cup. Then she picked up a piece of beef and rinsed it in the cup. Immediately, a layer of red oil floated in the cup. Yang Yi smiled as he put the washed beef into Shishi's bowl in front of her and said encouragingly, "Here, try it. It may not be so spicy." "Is it really not spicy?" Shishi asked curiously. "It's definitely spicy, but didn't you try it just now? It's not a big deal, isn't it? You can rest for a while and feel better. Isn't that right?" Yang Yi smiled and said, "Then it's not as spicy as before. Maybe you can eat it. Try it and see if it's as delicious as Xian said." Lan Xian was very good at learning when it came to eating. When Shishi was still hesitating, she hurriedly picked up a piece of beef, rinsed it in the cup, and then stuffed it into her mouth. She also ate the beef. This time, she didn't have to go through a mental struggle like before. Yes, it's quite delicious. This time, Cece finally smiled joyfully, revealing her curved eyebrows with a smile. Although it was still a little spicy, she felt much better after washing it. She only took a small sip of the drink. However, Lan Exine didn't think so. She savored it carefully, shook her head vigorously and shouted, No, it's not delicious. It's still better spicy. Exine's attitude towards food was really strict. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.